A second chance at Pelican Inn. A later-in-life love at Pelican Inn romance. Written by Susanne. Please like and subscribe. Chapter 1. Margot Winslow woke to sunlight streaming through gauzy curtains, the distant sound of waves breaking against the shore. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, orienting herself. Not her apartment in Boston. Not any of the hotel rooms she'd frequented during her years of gallery business. The Pelican Inn. Palmar Island. She was back. She rose and crossed to the window, drawn by the glittering expanse of ocean visible beyond the dunes. The restored inn was a revelation compared to the crumbling place she remembered. It had polished floors instead of creaky boards, pristine white walls rather than peeling paper, an air that smelled of fresh flowers and coffee instead of mildew. Last night's check-in had been a blur of warm welcomes. The innkeepers, Elise and Jacob, had been gracious, and that older woman, Miss Doris, had asked so many questions. Questions that had somehow led Margot to mention, however briefly, that long-ago summer. A slip she hoped Daphne hadn't noticed. Her friend did always have a keen ear for anything that could be construed as gossip. After dressing in a flowing linen dress and soft cardigan, she made her way downstairs. The inn was quiet this early, most guests still asleep or already out for morning beach walks. She found coffee in the dining room, where a continental breakfast had been artfully arranged on the sideboard. Cup in hand, she wandered onto the wraparound porch. The morning air held that particular coastal sweetness. Salt and jasmine and possibility. A perfect day to begin her vacation. 2 weeks of absolutely nothing but relaxation, just what she needed after selling the gallery and stepping into the uncertainty of what came next. The gardens caught her attention. So different from the overgrown tangle she remembered. Now, formal paths wound between carefully tended flower beds, climbing roses draped over trellises, and at the far end she could see the old stone bench. It was still there, weathered but intact. Before she could stop herself, Margot was walking down the porch steps and along one of the shell paths, drawn to that bench like a homing beacon. 37 years melted away with each step. She could almost hear his laugh, feel the warmth of his hand over hers as they'd sat there talking until the stars came out. She was so lost in memory that she almost missed the sound of excited chatter coming from around the corner of the hedge. A child's voice, bright with enthusiasm. "But what makes the flowers different colors, Grandpa? Is it like mixing paints?" "Sort of." The answering voice stopped Margot in her tracks. Deep, thoughtful, with a cadence she would know anywhere. "It's genetics. Like a recipe that tells the flower what color to be. Some flowers can even change color as they grow." "Like a magic trick?" "Nature's magic." Margot stood frozen, coffee cup halfway to her lips. She knew she should turn around, retreat to the safety of the inn. But her feet wouldn't move. And then they appeared around the hedge. A small boy with light brown curls, pointing excitedly at a butterfly, and beside him, Quentin Rhodes. Silver threaded through his once dark hair, lines etched at the corners of his eyes, but unmistakably him. He wore a well-fitted button-down in pale blue, sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. His jawline was stronger, now sporting a neatly trimmed beard, but his profile, the one she'd watched countless times as he sketched buildings that existed only in his imagination, remained the same. The years had been kind to him. More than kind. He looked distinguished, solid. Real in a way that her memories of him had begun to feel less so with each passing year. The little boy, his grandson, darted off toward a particularly vibrant flower bed, and Quentin straightened, turning slightly. For one heart-stopping moment, Margot thought he'd seen her. But his gaze passed over where she stood partially concealed by a climbing rose, tracking his grandson's movements instead. "Careful, Finn," he called. "Stay on the path. Those flowers were just planted." Finn. The grandson had a name now. A person, not just an abstract concept. Which meant Quentin had a child, a family. A whole life she knew nothing about. Of course he did. What had she expected? That he'd remain suspended in time, preserved exactly as she remembered him? The thought spurred Margot into motion. She retreated up the path, heart pounding as if she'd run miles instead of mere steps. By the time she reached the porch, her coffee had gone cold, but she barely noticed. Quentin Rhodes was here. At the same inn. At the same time. After 37 years, what were the odds? Daphne was in the inn's small library, leafing through a book on local history when Margot found her. Her silver blonde hair was twisted into an elegant knot, and she wore a flowing kaftan in shades of coral and turquoise that made her the brightest thing in the room. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said immediately, closing her book. "What happened?" Margot closed the library door behind her and leaned against it. "He's here." "Who's here?" Daphne's brow furrowed, then cleared with sudden understanding. "Wait. Not the architect you mentioned to Miss Doris last night? Your summer fling?" Quentin Rhodes. The name felt strange on her lips after so long. "He's in the garden with his grandson." "Well." Daphne set the book aside, her eyes sparkling with interest. "Isn't that a delicious coincidence? The universe works in mysterious ways." "This isn't the universe. It's a cruel cosmic joke." Margot sank into an armchair opposite her friend. "What am I supposed to do now? Say hello like a normal person?" Daphne suggested. "Maybe catch up over coffee? You're both adults, not teenagers who had an awkward breakup at prom." "It's been 37 years, Daph. I can't just walk up to him and say, 'Remember me?'" "Why not? Clearly you remember him." Her friend's eyes softened. "You never did tell me why you lost touch." "The full story, I mean." Margot sighed, knowing Daphne wouldn't let this go. "The usual reasons. Distance, time. We wrote letters for a while, but they became less frequent. Eventually they stopped altogether." "His doing or yours?" "Both, I suppose." But even as she said it, Margot remembered waiting for letters that never came, finally forcing herself to stop checking the mailbox with such pathetic hope. Life got in the way. My job at the gallery was demanding. He was finishing his degree. And in 37 years, with the internet making the world smaller by the day, it never occurred to you to look him up. "I did." The admission surprised even Margot. "Once or twice. I saw his career taking off, the awards, the buildings. I even attended a lecture he gave in Boston about 10 years ago." "And you didn't approach him? From the back row? As what, a groupie?" Margot shook her head. "Besides, he was married. I saw his wife in the audience. She was beautiful." "That doesn't mean he's still married," Daphne pointed out. "He could be widowed. Divorced. It doesn't matter." Margot stood, too restless to remain seated. "Whatever we had was a lifetime ago. We're different people now." "You keep saying that like you're trying to convince yourself." Daphne's tone was gentle but knowing. "Just be friendly, Margot. Say hello. The worst that happens is an awkward conversation. The best." She shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. "I'll think about it." "You'll overthink it," Daphne corrected with affection. "But it doesn't matter. This inn isn't big enough for you to avoid each other for 2 weeks. The universe has clearly decided you two need to have a conversation." Margot couldn't argue with that logic, much as she wanted to. At some point, their paths would cross. The only question was whether she'd be prepared when they did. Chapter 2. "Grandpa, look. I can see where the sea turtles might come up on the beach." Finn pressed his face against the glass of the garden room window, fogging it with his excited breath. "Can we go look for them tonight?" Quentin smiled at his grandson's enthusiasm. "Remember what the conservation guide said, buddy. The turtles are shy. We have to be very quiet and stay back if we spot one." "I can be quiet," Finn insisted, though his bouncing energy suggested otherwise. "As quiet as a mouse. Or a ninja turtle." "Right, Dad?" Owen looked up from the local guidebook he was studying. Ninja turtles aren't actually quiet, bud. That's kind of their whole deal. But real turtles are, Finn countered with 6-year-old logic. And I'll be just like them. Quentin left them to their turtle debate and stepped out onto the small patio adjoining their suite. The Pelican Inn had been transformed since he'd last seen it, from a ramshackle boarding house to this elegant, carefully restored gem. The owners had preserved its historical character while making it comfortable for modern guests. As an architect, he could appreciate the balance they'd struck. As a man, though, being here unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The gardens especially. They'd been wild and overgrown that summer, not this manicured showcase. Yet the paths followed much the same pattern, and that old stone bench. He'd spotted it immediately upon their arrival yesterday, had steered Finn toward it this morning mostly as an excuse to see if it was really the same one. It was. The very bench where he and Margot had sat talking until stars filled the sky. Where she'd asked about his dreams of designing buildings that would stand for generations. Where he'd first kissed her, tasting salt on her lips from their earlier swim. Dad? Bridget appeared in the doorway, breaking into his thoughts. You okay? Enjoying the view. He gestured toward the ocean, visible beyond the dunes. It's beautiful, she agreed, stepping out to join him. Peaceful. He nodded, grateful for her presence. Bridget had been his rock these past 3 years, ever since Catherine's passing. Too much so, perhaps. She'd put her own grief on hold to help him through his, had taken on the role of caretaker with the same determination she brought to everything. I'm glad we did this, she said, leaning against the railing. It's nice seeing Finn so excited. And Owen actually turned his phone off. Miracles do happen. Quentin smiled. How are you holding up? Really? Shouldn't I be asking you that? She gave him a pointed look. You've been different since we arrived. Quieter. He considered deflection, then discarded the idea. Bridget deserved better. This place brings back memories. Of Mom? The question made him hesitate. Catherine had never been to Palmar Island. They'd talked about visiting, had even planned a trip for their 30th anniversary, but then her diagnosis had come, and travel became impossible. No, he said finally. From before I met your mother. A long time ago. Bridget studied his face. You never mentioned you'd been here before. It didn't seem important. But even as he said it, Quentin knew it wasn't true. He'd chosen this island, this specific inn, for reasons that went beyond Finn's turtle obsession. Dad. His daughter's tone held gentle reproach. You can talk to me, you know. About anything. Even the parts of your life from before. Before Catherine. Before Bridget. Before he'd built the life that defined him for so long. I know, sweetheart. He squeezed her hand. It's just complicated. More complicated than helping me explain to Finn why the tooth fairy might be delayed because Daddy was on call all night. He laughed, grateful for the shift in mood. Fair point. Look. Finn's excited shout came from inside. Grandpa, come quick. I see dolphins. Duty calls, Quentin said, and Bridget smiled. Go. Be the hero. We'll head down to the beach after breakfast. As Quentin joined his grandson at the window, pointing out the dorsal fins cutting through the waves, he couldn't shake the feeling that returning to this place had awakened something long dormant. Some part of himself he'd packed away decades ago, like a treasured book placed on a high shelf and gradually forgotten. Coming back to the Pelican Inn had been an impulse, one he hadn't fully examined. But now, with the familiar scent of salt and jasmine in the air, memories were surfacing that he'd thought long buried. Of a summer that had changed him. Of a woman with gray-blue eyes and a laugh that had made him feel weightless. Of Margot, who'd been his first real love, though he'd never told her. Never told anyone. Not even Catherine, who'd been his wife, his partner, the mother of his child. He'd loved Catherine deeply, honestly. But first loves left their mark. And some places held memories that couldn't be erased, only covered over by time and choice. As he stood with Finn, watching dolphins play in the distance, Quentin wondered about the odds. What were the chances that after all these years, he'd find himself back at the Pelican Inn? That something, call it fate or coincidence or just poor planning, had drawn him back to the place where his heart had first learned what it meant to truly love someone? Whatever the reason, he was here now. With his family. And that was where his focus needed to be. The rest was just ancient history. Wasn't it? The Pelican Inn's dining room balanced elegance with comfort, white tablecloths and fresh flowers beneath vintage light fixtures that cast a warm glow. Through tall windows, the setting sun painted the sky in gold and crimson. "Can I have shrimp?" Finn asked as they followed the hostess to their table. "And key lime pie?" "Jacob said they have the best key lime pie." "Who's Jacob?" Owen asked, steering Finn around a waiter. "The man who owns the inn with Miss Elise," Finn explained with the certainty of someone who had already made friends with the entire staff. "He said there's a ghost who haunts the third floor." "I'm sure he was joking about the ghost," Bridget said quickly. As they settled in, Quentin scanned the room out of habit, his gaze stopping abruptly at a table across the room. Two women sat there, one with silver blonde hair styled in elegant waves, animated in her gestures. But it was the other woman who caught his attention. Wavy salt and pepper hair fell past her shoulders. She wore a soft gray cardigan over a simple blue dress. Margot. His heart kicked against his ribs with such force that for a moment, he couldn't breathe. "Dad?" Bridget's voice pulled him back. "Did you hear me? I asked what you're having." Sorry, he forced his attention to the menu he hadn't opened. Just taking in the view. Throughout the meal he carefully avoided looking directly at her. Once or twice, he caught himself straining to hear her voice over the general restaurant noise. "You won't believe who's sitting across the room," Bridget said as their plates were being cleared. "The woman with silver blonde hair is an artist Finn and I met on the beach this afternoon. Daphne something. She paints seascapes." Quentin's stomach dropped. "She invited us to join her and her friend for dessert," Bridget continued. "Finn was so taken with her stories about swimming with dolphins that I couldn't say no." "I hope that's okay?" "Of course," he managed, though his mouth had gone dry. "The more the merrier." All too soon, Daphne was approaching their table with a theatrical flourish of her colorful scarf, Margot following more slowly behind her. "There's my favorite junior marine biologist," she greeted Finn. "I was just telling Margot about your impressive knowledge of dolphin species." "I know all of them," Finn confirmed with the confidence only a 6-year-old could muster. "Even the pink ones in the Amazon." "The Amazon River dolphin," Margot said, her voice washing over Quentin like a wave of memory. "Also known as the boto. They're quite special." When her gaze met his, he saw the flash of recognition, the subtle widening of her eyes. "Quentin," she said softly, his name an acknowledgement rather than a question. "It's been a long time." "Margot." His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Yes, it has." "Well." Daphne clapped her hands together. "Isn't this a delightful coincidence? Why don't we all have dessert together? I hear the key lime pie is transcendent." "You know each other?" Bridget looked between them, curiosity evident. "We met here, actually," Margot said, her composure admirable. "Many years ago. At this very inn," Daphne clarified as they settled around the table. "Though it was a bit less polished back then." "Were you friends?" Finn asked, looking between them. Quentin and Margot exchanged a glance, a world of history passing silently between them. "Yes," Quentin said finally. "We were." "What kind of friend? Like a best friend or just a regular friend?" Finn persisted. "Finn," Bridget cautioned gently. "That's enough questions." "It's all right," Margot said. "We were summer friends, Finn. The kind you make when you're on vacation." "Oh." He nodded sagely. "Like my friend Alex at the beach last year." We built a huge castle, but then I had to go home and never saw him again. Something like that, Quentin agreed, grateful for the simplicity. So you're an architect, Margot said once they'd ordered dessert, her tone conversational. I've followed your work over the years. The Sorin building in Chicago is particularly impressive. He looked up, surprised. You've seen it? In person, actually. I attended the exhibition at the MoMA about your sustainable design innovations, she said. My gallery in Boston specialized in architectural photography for a while, and your buildings were quite popular with collectors. You own a gallery? Quentin's voice softened with something like wonder. You always talked about working with art someday. The slight widening of her eyes told him she was surprised he remembered. Yes, well. Dreams do come true sometimes. Margot just sold her gallery, Daphne contributed. After 30 years of making other artists' careers, she's finally going to focus on her own work. You're an artist? Finn perked up. What do you make? I'm a photographer, primarily, Margot said, her expression softening. I capture moments and places that feel meaningful. Can you take pictures of turtles? Finn asked eagerly. We're going to see them tonight. You can come with us if you want. Finn, Bridget interjected. I'm sure Miss Margot has her own plans. Actually, Daphne said with a brightness that made Quentin instantly wary, we were planning to join the conservation walk tonight as well. See? I told you. Finn beamed. We're gonna see turtles. As Finn excitedly listed all the turtle facts he planned to share with Margot on their walk, Quentin noticed Daphne leaning closer to Bridget at the other end of the table. They were quite the pair back then, he overheard Daphne saying in a conspiratorial tone. College sweethearts. A summer romance for the ages. Daphne, Margot cautioned, her cheeks coloring slightly. I'm sure Bridget doesn't need a history lesson. Quentin watched his daughter's expression shift, surprise giving way to protective concern. Dad never mentioned it, she said, her tone carefully neutral. It was a lifetime ago, Quentin said, meeting Margot's eyes. We were different people then. Were we? The question slipped from Margot so quietly he almost missed it. Chapter 3. You're overthinking it, Daphne said, nudging Margot with her elbow as they walked along the shoreline. I can practically hear the gears grinding in your head. The early morning beach stretched empty before them, waves gently erasing their footprints. She'd suggested this walk hoping the rhythm of the ocean might quiet her thoughts about last night's unexpected reunion, but Daphne wasn't letting her retreat into silence. Margot smiled despite herself. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's known you for over 20 years. Daphne paused to examine a delicate sand dollar, then placed it gently back on the shore. The turtle walk wasn't so bad, was it? No, Margot admitted. They hadn't seen any turtles, but the conservation guide had been knowledgeable, and Finn's enthusiasm had been infectious. His grandson is charming. And his daughter? Protective. Margot remembered the way Bridget had watched her. Not unfriendly, but wary. Assessing. I don't blame her. It must be strange to discover your father had a life before your mother. A life that included you. Daphne linked her arm through Margot's as they continued down the beach. And now fate has thrown you back together, in the very place where it all began. If that's not the universe sending a sign, I don't know what is. Margot rolled her eyes. The universe isn't that invested in my love life, Daph. Someone should be, her friend retorted. Lord knows you haven't been. When was the last time you even went on a date? I was running a business. I didn't have time to date. And now you've sold the gallery. Daphne stopped, turning to face her fully. What's your excuse now? The question hung between them, carried on the salt air. Margot stared out at the horizon, where the blue of the ocean met the blue of the sky in a seamless line. Maybe I'm simply not interested, she said finally. Not everyone needs a relationship to be fulfilled. I have my photography, my friends. Your carefully constructed walls, Daphne finished for her. Darling, I've watched you spend the last 2 decades keeping people at arm's length. And that's fine if it's what you truly want. But seeing you with him last night. She shook her head. There was something there. Still. Margot couldn't deny it. Sitting across from Quentin at dinner, watching him with his family, hearing his voice, had stirred feelings she'd thought long buried. Complicated, messy feelings she wasn't sure she wanted to examine too closely. He was married for over 30 years, she reminded Daphne. He built a life with someone else. Had a child. Has a grandchild. And now? Now he's a widower who's probably still grieving. His daughter mentioned that his wife has only been gone for 3 years. 3 years is a long time to grieve alone, Daphne said gently. Or not nearly long enough. Margot bent to pick up a shell, a small, perfect scallop, its ridges smooth against her fingers. Besides, we're entirely different people. Whatever we had was based on who we were at 22. Young, idealistic, with our whole lives ahead of us. And now you're older, wiser, with the perspective to truly appreciate what you might have found. Daphne squeezed her arm. At least talk to him. Really talk, not just that awkward small talk we endured last night. What's the worst that could happen? I make a fool of myself? Discover that what I've been carrying all these years was just a romanticized memory? Margot slipped the shell into her pocket. Or, Daphne countered, you could find that the connection you shared wasn't just about being young. That some things, some people, matter in ways that transcend time and circumstance. A small group of sandpipers scurried along the shoreline ahead of them, their spindly legs a blur of motion as they chased the retreating waves. Margot watched them, envying their single-minded focus on the task at hand. Has it occurred to you, she said finally, that I might not want to reopen old wounds? That I've made my peace with the past and would prefer to leave it there? Daphne's expression softened. Of course it has. And if that's truly what you want, I'll never mention it again. She linked her arm back through Margot's as they resumed walking. But I've known you too long not to recognize when you're running from something that might actually be worth the risk. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the rhythmic wash of waves and the distant cry of gulls. The beach stretched before them, nearly empty at this early hour, the footprints they left behind the only evidence of their passing. He used to say that buildings were like relationships, Margot said suddenly. That the best ones were crafted to withstand time and weather, with foundations deep enough to remain steady through any storm. Sounds like a man who understood the value of permanence, Daphne observed. Yes. The irony wasn't lost on Margot. Yet we let what we had fade away like footprints on the shore. She gestured behind them, where the incoming tide was already erasing their tracks. Maybe you were both too young to understand what you'd found, Daphne suggested. Too focused on building your separate futures to see that they might have been stronger built together. Or maybe it was never meant to last in the first place. Margot sighed. A summer romance, beautiful because it was fleeting. Then why does seeing him again affect you so deeply? Daphne's question was gentle but direct. Margot had no ready answer. Why indeed? She'd had other relationships over the years. Some casual, some more serious. None had lasted, true, but she'd attributed that to her commitment to her career, her independence. Not to some lingering attachment to a man she'd known for one brief summer in her early 20s. Yet here she was, heart racing at the mere thought of him, stomach fluttering like she was 22 again instead of pushing 60. I don't know, she admitted finally. That's what scares me. Good. Daphne's smile was triumphant. Fear means it matters. And things that matter are worth exploring, not running from. Says the woman who changes her hair color and apartment every other year. Precisely why you should trust me on this, Daphne laughed. I'm an expert on both running and staying. They turned back toward the inn, its white clapboard siding and red tin roof visible in the distance. Somewhere inside those walls was Quentin, perhaps having breakfast with his family, or looking out at the same ocean, thinking his own thoughts about last night's unexpected reunion. I'm not saying marry the man, Daphne added. Just be open to the possibility that the universe might know what it's doing for once. That crossing paths again after all these years might not be mere coincidence. Margot squeezed her friend's hand, grateful for her unwavering support, even when it came in the form of gentle pushing. I'll think about it. The wicker chair creaked softly as Margot shifted, trying to find a comfortable position that also allowed her to pretend she wasn't watching for Quentin. After her walk with Daphne, she'd showered and changed, then gravitated to the wraparound porch with a book she hadn't managed to read a single page of. Hiding or hunting? Elise asked, appearing with a tray holding a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses. Excuse me? Margot looked up, startled. Sorry. The innkeeper smiled, setting the tray on the small table between the chairs. Miss Doris says there are 2 kinds of porch sitters. Those hiding from something and those watching for someone. I'm just enjoying the view, Margot said, though the blush warming her cheeks suggested otherwise. It is spectacular. Elise poured lemonade into both glasses. Jacob and I still stop to admire it, even after living here for over a year. She handed Margot a glass. Mind if I join you? The breakfast rush is over, and I have a rare 15 minutes to myself. Please. Margot gestured to the empty chair, grateful for the distraction. They sat, sipping lemonade and watching gulls wheel over the dunes. In the garden below, one of the staff was deadheading roses, the snip of shears barely audible over the distant crash of waves. I understand you've known the inn longer than most of our guests, Elise said finally. Yes, though it was quite different then. Margot traced a droplet of condensation down her glass. Not nearly as well kept. The owners were an elderly couple who couldn't manage the upkeep. My brother started the restoration about 5 years ago, Elise explained. He had this vision of what the place could be, its history preserved but made comfortable for modern guests. He succeeded, Margot said sincerely. It's beautiful. He would have been pleased to hear that. Something in Elise's tone made Margot look up. He passed away last year. Left the inn to me. I'm so sorry. Elise's smile was tinged with sadness. Thank you. It was unexpected. But continuing his work here, it's helped me feel connected to him still. Before Margot could respond, the screen door opened behind them. I hope I'm not interrupting, Quentin said, his deep voice sending an involuntary shiver through her despite the warmth of the day. Not at all, Elise stood with a graceful motion that suggested a practiced retreat. I need to check on something in the kitchen anyway. Please, help yourself to lemonade, Mr. Rhodes. And then they were alone, the space Elise had vacated now filled by Quentin's solid presence. He wore khaki shorts and a light blue button-down with rolled sleeves, casual yet somehow distinguished. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, making it gleam. I didn't mean to chase your company away, he said, settling into the chair Elise had just left. I think she was making a strategic exit. Margot's smile felt unsteady on her lips. How's your morning been? Busy. Finn was up at dawn, insisting we check the turtle nests again. The conservation guide promised to call if there was any hatching activity, but try explaining the concept of patience to a 6-year-old. His enthusiasm is wonderful. Margot remembered the way Finn had peppered the guide with questions, his genuine concern for the turtle eggs touching in its earnestness. You have a remarkable grandson. Thank you. Pride warmed his voice. He's the light of our lives. Especially after. He trailed off, then reached for the lemonade pitcher. May I? Please. As he poured, Margot noticed the fine lines around his eyes, deeper than they'd been in her memory but somehow only enhancing the character of his face. His hands were the same, large, capable, with long fingers that had once sketched buildings on napkins, traced patterns on her skin. This is strange, isn't it? He said suddenly, setting his glass down. Meeting again after all this time? Very strange, she agreed, relieved he'd broached the topic first. I never expected, well, any of this. Neither did I. He leaned back in the chair, his gaze steady on her face. You look wonderful, by the way. I should have said that last night. Thank you. She ignored the ridiculous flutter in her chest at the compliment. So do you. A brief smile touched his lips. Kind of you to say, though I'm pretty sure I have more gray hair than I did yesterday, thanks to Finn's turtle adventures. It suits you. The words slipped out before she could edit them. The gray, I mean. Distinguished. That's a polite way of saying old, he teased, and for a moment they were young again, trading light-hearted jabs on this very porch. If you're old, what does that make me? She countered. Beautiful, he said simply, and the directness of it caught her off guard. You've always been beautiful, Margot. She looked away, unsure how to respond to the quiet intensity in his voice. Below them, the gardener had moved on to the hydrangeas, their blue blooms nodding in the breeze. I meant to write, she said finally, addressing a question that had lingered for decades. After the letters stopped. But it felt. I don't know. Like maybe I was holding on to something that was already over. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. I thought the same thing. That maybe it was kinder to let it fade naturally, instead of dragging it out. Was it kinder? The question hung between them, weighted with all the years that had passed, all the paths not taken. I don't know, he admitted. I've wondered about that more times than I can count. Yet you built a good life, she observed. A family. A career. Yes. There was no hesitation in his voice. I loved my wife deeply. Being Catherine's husband, Bridget's father has been the greatest privilege of my life. He turned his glass slowly between his palms. And you? Were there others after? After you? She smiled faintly. Yes, though nothing that lasted. My gallery became my primary relationship. I was good at it. Nurturing other artists' careers and building a reputation. It left little room for anything else. But now you've sold it? Last month. After 30 years, it was time for something new. She gestured vaguely toward the horizon. Hence this trip. A chance to figure out what comes next. And what does come next? I'm not sure yet. My own photography, perhaps. I've always kept it as a side pursuit, but Daphne thinks I should focus on it more seriously now. I'd like to see your work sometime, he said, and the genuine interest in his voice made her heart twist strangely. Maybe, she allowed. If you'd show me your latest designs in return. Deal. The word held a warmth that made her look up, meeting his eyes directly for perhaps the first time since he'd joined her. Time seemed to suspend as they regarded each other, the years falling away and pooling at their feet like discarded clothing. In his gaze, she caught glimpses of the young man she'd known, passionate about architecture, quick to laugh, with dreams as vast as the ocean before them. But there was more now, depth, wisdom, the weight of a life fully lived. Grandpa. Finn's voice broke the moment as he burst onto the porch, trailing sand and excitement. Dad says we can go kayaking now. The place has see-through ones where you can watch the fish underneath you. Quentin turned to his grandson with an indulgent smile. Did he say we're all going, or just you and him? Everyone. Even you, if you want, Finn added, flashing a grin that revealed a missing front tooth when he noticed Margot. Dad says the more the merrier. That's very kind, but I have plans with Daphne this afternoon, Margot said, touched by the inclusion nonetheless. Another time, maybe, Quentin suggested, and the possibility in those words wasn't lost on either of them. Maybe, she echoed. Come on, Grandpa, they're only holding the boats for 20 minutes. Finn tugged at Quentin's hand. With an apologetic smile, Quentin stood. Duty calls. But Margot, I'd like to continue this conversation. Maybe dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us? The invitation hung in the air between them, fragile as a soap bubble, shimmering with potential. Behind him, Finn bounced with impatience, a living reminder of all the life that had happened in the decades since they'd last sat on this porch together. Yes, she said finally, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. I'd like that. The smile that transformed his face was worth the flutter of anxiety in her chest. 8 o'clock? I'll make reservations somewhere away from the inn. Give us some privacy. Perfect. With a nod and a final glance that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words, he followed his grandson inside, leaving Margot alone with her racing thoughts and the lingering sense that something significant had just shifted between them. Chapter 4. Fancy meeting you here, a familiar voice said behind Quentin as he signed the liability waiver for the island tour. He turned to find Margot standing there, camera hanging from her neck, an amused smile playing on her lips. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, surprised. My friend Daphne was supposed to join me, but she came down with a sudden migraine, Margot replied, her tone suggesting she didn't believe it for a second. And you? I thought your whole family would be joining the island tours. Bridget and Owen are sleeping in. With Finn's crack of dawn wake-up calls, they've earned it. He glanced down at his grandson, who was intently studying the tour brochure with its colorful maps and wildlife illustrations. So it's just the two of us today. 3 of us, Finn corrected without looking up. I'm coming too, remember? How could I forget? Quentin ruffled his grandson's hair. My junior explorer. Margot's smile widened. Well, it seems we both have friends and family with interesting timing. Their guide, a cheerful woman in her 40s with sun-weathered skin and an encyclopedic knowledge of the island, gathered the small group near the harbor. As she began her introduction, Quentin found himself aware of Margot standing beside him, their conversation on the porch yesterday still fresh in his mind. Having dinner plans for that evening hadn't prepared him for seeing her this morning. He'd spent half the night thinking about their upcoming date. If that's what it was. And here we have the oldest live oak on Palmar Island, the guide announced half an hour later, gesturing to a massive tree whose gnarled branches created a canopy over the narrow path. Estimated to be over 400 years old. Spanish explorers likely passed beneath these very branches. Quentin glanced sideways at Margot, catching her eye with a small smile. This was the first moment they'd had to breathe since the tour began. Grandpa, look. Finn tugged at his hand, pointing up at a small gray shape nestled in the crook of a branch. Is that an owl? Good eye, young man, the guide said before Quentin could answer. That's a barred owl. They're most active at dawn and dusk, but this one seems to be enjoying an afternoon nap. Finn beamed at the recognition, then turned to Margot. Do you have your camera? Can you take a picture? Already on it, she replied, adjusting her lens with practiced hands. Quentin watched her work, admiring the confidence in her movements. The professional piece of equipment was a far cry from the second-hand film camera she'd carried that long ago summer, but her expression of concentration was exactly the same. Brow slightly furrowed, lower lip caught between her teeth. Perfect, Margot murmured, reviewing the image on her display. She knelt beside Finn, showing him the result. See how I caught that little bit of light on his feathers? Finn nodded solemnly. It's awesome. Can you send it to my dad's phone? He's collecting all the cool animals we see. Of course. The tour group moved on, following a shell-lined path toward the spot where they could see the historic lighthouse on a neighboring island. Quentin found himself grateful for whatever circumstances had brought them together this morning. After their conversation yesterday, he'd been eager to see her again, to continue exploring this unexpected reconnection. Finn's presence was both complication and blessing. His endless curiosity and easy acceptance of Margot created a buffer that made their time together feel natural rather than loaded with expectation. Yet his energy demanded attention, leaving little room for the deeper conversations Quentin found himself increasingly eager to have. Did you know, Finn said, skipping between them, that lighthouses used to have people living in them all the time? Dad says they had to climb up and light the lamp every single night. That's right, Quentin confirmed. The lighthouse keeper had an important job keeping ships safe. Would you live in a lighthouse? Finn asked Margot seriously. She considered the question with the gravity it deserved. I might. The views would be spectacular for photography. But it would get lonely, don't you think? Not if you had someone with you, Finn said with 6-year-old logic. Like Grandpa. He knows how to fix stuff when it breaks. Quentin felt heat rise to his face, but Margot merely smiled. That's an important skill in an old lighthouse, she agreed, her eyes meeting Quentin's briefly over Finn's head. The tour continued around the island's historic district, where colonial homes had been preserved alongside newer buildings designed to complement the historical aesthetic. As an architect, Quentin appreciated the balance. Respecting history while accommodating modern life. Remember that little cafe? Margot asked quietly as they passed a building now housing an art gallery. The one with the mismatched chairs and the owner who played jazz records all day? Antonio's, Quentin nodded, pleased she remembered. Best coffee on the island. We spent hours there talking about everything, she finished. My roommates used to tease me for disappearing there every afternoon. Mine started charging me a finder's fee whenever they had to track me down, he admitted with a laugh. Finn, momentarily distracted by a street performer juggling, didn't notice their exchange, this small acknowledgement of shared history, of a past that belonged only to them. As the tour concluded near the harbor, Quentin checked his watch. We should get you back to your parents, buddy. Finn's shoulders slumped. Do we have to? I want to see the model ships in that store we passed. Another day, Quentin promised. Your dad's looking forward to taking you fishing this afternoon, remember? Margot knelt to Finn's eye level. I enjoyed exploring with you today. Maybe next time you can show me those model ships yourself? Really? Finn brightened immediately. I know lots about ships. Especially pirate ones. Then I'll need an expert guide. She straightened, meeting Quentin's gaze. That is, if it's okay with your grandfather. More than okay, Quentin said, his voice carrying more emotion than the simple response warranted. I'm looking forward to our dinner tonight. The reminder of their plans hung between them, weighted with possibility. After their conversation on the porch yesterday, tonight's dinner would be different, deliberate, intentional. A step toward something. So am I, she said, and the smile that curved her lips sent a familiar warmth through him, a sensation he'd thought long forgotten but now recognized as something he'd been missing for years. The brick oven's warm lighting cast a golden glow over Margot's face as she laughed at something Quentin had said. Around them, the restaurant hummed with conversation and the clink of silverware against plates, but he found himself focused solely on her. The way her eyes caught the candlelight, how her fingers occasionally brushed her salt and pepper hair behind her ear. This is quite an upgrade from the places we could afford back then, he said, looking around at the exposed brick walls and iron sconces. No more pizza by the slice? Her smile was tinged with nostalgia. We've graduated to proper tablecloths. Something warm unfurled in his chest at the shared memory. Some things do improve with age, she said, her eyes meeting his with quiet meaning. Their conversation drifted between past and present, remembering who they had been that summer, acknowledging who they were now. The candle between them burned lower as they shared stories of the years between, carefully navigating around the sharper edges of loss and missed opportunity. Finn was quite the trooper on the tour today, Margot said after a comfortable lull. Most 6-year-olds don't have the patience for historical commentary. He's always been curious. Gets that from his mother. Quentin smiled at the thought of his grandson's endless questions. Thank you for being so engaged with him. It was my pleasure. Her expression softened. You've done well, Quentin. Your family. The simple observation carried a weight he couldn't quite define. Thank you. They're everything to me. I could tell. Her eyes were warm, free of judgment. The way you are with Finn is beautiful to watch. As their dinner plates were cleared, Quentin found himself reluctant for the evening to end. For more days before his family returned home. A week until Margot left the island. Such a small window of time after so many years apart. Do you remember that rainstorm? She asked suddenly. The one that trapped us in that little gazebo at the south end of the beach? 3 hours, he laughed. With nothing but a half-eaten bag of chips and that paperback you were reading. The Prince of Tides. Her eyes lit with pleasure that he remembered. You let me read it aloud to pass the time. Let you? I was captivated. both by the story and. He hesitated, then finished honestly, and by your voice. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I'd forgotten that part. I hadn't. The simple truth hung between them. Later, as they walked back toward the inn along the moonlit harbor path, Quentin found himself taking in the faint scent of her perfume, noticing the occasional brush of her arm against his. My daughter noticed we'd been spending time together. He hesitated. She's concerned it might be too soon. Too soon after your wife? Margot asked gently. Partly that. Quentin's gaze drifted toward the boats rocking gently in the harbor. For Bridget, her mother's memory is something she guards fiercely. The idea of someone new in my life is complicated, Margot finished for him, understanding in her voice. Of course it is. He turned to face her, his expression troubled despite the evening's warmth. I just wanted you to know. It might take her some time. Time is something I understand, Margot said softly, her hand finding his in the darkness, not as resolution, but as acknowledgement of the challenge ahead. The Pelican Inn came into view, its windows warm with light against the night sky. Soon they would reach its doors, return to their separate rooms, and this evening would become memory. I've enjoyed tonight, she said softly. All of it. So have I. He turned to face her fully. More than I can say. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken words and decades of separate lives. Then, with a naturalness that belied the years apart, Margot leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. Good night, Quentin, she whispered. But as she began to pull away, his hand rose almost of its own accord, cupping her face with a tenderness that surprised him. Their eyes met in the moonlight, a silent question passing between them. Her answer came in the form of a small nod. Slowly, he leaned forward until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with a sweet familiarity that transcended time. Her hands came to rest against his chest, and he could feel the slight tremor in her fingers, matching the unexpected racing of his own heart. That was. He began when they parted. Inevitable, she suggested, a smile in her voice. He chuckled softly. I was going to say worth waiting for. Chapter 5. Margot adjusted the focus on her camera, capturing the scene unfolding on the beach below the inn's garden. She hadn't planned to photograph people this morning, but the tableau before her was too compelling to ignore. Quentin knelt in the sand beside Finn, their heads bent together over an elaborate sandcastle. The early morning light caught the silver in Quentin's hair, the golden brown of Finn's curls. She clicked the shutter, then again, capturing the moment Finn threw his head back in laughter at something Quentin said. Their connection was beautiful, the easy way Quentin listened to his grandson's chatter, his patience as tiny hands mimicked his movements, the genuine delight they took in each other's company. Last night's kiss lingered in her mind, a persistent echo that had followed her into dreams and greeted her upon waking. It was a deeper yearning she'd spent decades carefully ignoring. What might her life have been, had things gone differently all those years ago? The question arose unbidden as she watched Quentin stand and brush sand from his knees, then extend his hand to pull Finn to his feet. Would she have had a child of her own? Grandchildren? A partner to grow old alongside? She'd never regretted her choice to focus on her career. The gallery had brought her satisfaction, purpose, and connections with artists whose work moved her deeply. The occasional loneliness, the empty apartment she returned to each night, the holidays spent with friends rather than family, had seemed a reasonable trade-off for her independence. But watching Quentin with Finn stirred a longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge in years. Not just for what might have been with him specifically, but for the path not taken. On the beach, Finn was pointing toward the water, clearly requesting something. Quentin nodded, and together they walked toward the shoreline, their footprints forming parallel tracks in the damp sand. The boy's hand looked tiny in his grandfather's larger one, yet Quentin adjusted his stride naturally to match Finn's shorter steps. It was in these small gestures that Margot saw the measure of the man Quentin had become. Successful in his career, yes. But more importantly, successful in what mattered. In being present for those he loved. Finn spotted her then, waving enthusiastically. Miss Margot. Come see what we found. Quentin turned, his eyes finding hers across the distance. Even from here, she could see his smile deepen, the slight lift of his hand in greeting. An invitation. She hesitated only briefly before making her way down to the beach. The wet sand was cool beneath her bare feet as she crossed to where they waited. Look. Finn pointed excitedly to something in the shallow water. Grandpa says it's a horseshoe crab. It looks like an alien spaceship. They're living fossils, Quentin explained, his voice warm with the pleasure of sharing knowledge. They've been around for more than 400 million years, practically unchanged. Margot knelt beside them, examining the strange creature. Remarkable. To remain the same when everything around you evolves. Constancy has its value, Quentin said quietly. Their eyes met over Finn's head, a world of unspoken meaning passing between them. Last night had changed something, opened a door neither had expected to find. Grandpa's teaching me about the beach creatures and stuff, Finn announced, oblivious to the undercurrents between the adults. You can come too. We're gonna look for sea glass next. It's where broken bottles get tumbled by the ocean until they're smooth and frosted, Quentin explained. Nature's way of making something discarded beautiful again. The metaphor wasn't lost on Margot. Perhaps that's what was happening between them. Time and distance was smoothing the rough edges of their past, transforming what had been broken into something unexpectedly precious. I'd love to join your expedition, she said, rewarded with Finn's delighted grin and Quentin's quiet smile. As they walked along the shoreline, Finn darting ahead, Quentin's hand brushed against hers. I didn't expect to see you this morning, he said softly. I came out to photograph the garden and the dunes, she admitted. But found a more compelling subject. His eyes held a question. In response, she lifted her camera and showed him the display. It showed the image of him and Finn bent over their sandcastle, faces alight with shared joy. You have a good eye, he said, something catching in his voice. I had good subjects. She hesitated. You're wonderful with him. It's beautiful to watch. He makes it easy. Children that age see the world with such clarity. A shadow crossed his face. I missed some of that with Bridget. Working too much, traveling for projects. But you're here now, Margot said gently. For both of them. Yes. He looked ahead to where Finn was examining something in the sand. Second chances are precious things, aren't they? Yes, she said softly. They are. Ahead of them, Finn held up a piece of sea glass, its edges worn smooth by years of tumbling in the waves. Look what I found. It's blue. That's the rarest kind. The inn's fire pit glowed in the gathering darkness, flames dancing against the deepening blue of the evening sky. Margot sat alone on one of the Adirondack chairs, a light shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling air. The day with Quentin and Finn had left her oddly unsettled, stirring emotions she hadn't expected. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, deliberate enough to announce his presence, yet hesitant enough to offer her the chance to retreat if she wished. Mind some company? Quentin asked, standing at the edge of the circle of light. Please. She gestured to the empty chair beside her. He settled into it with a soft sigh, his gaze fixed on the flames. For several minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, the crackling fire and distant sound of waves the only soundtrack to their thoughts. Finn couldn't stop talking about our morning adventure, he said finally. He's decided you should be an official part of all future expeditions. I'd be honored. She smiled into the darkness. It's been years since I've seen the world through a child's eyes. It's refreshing. It keeps you young, Quentin agreed. Or at least, reminds you of what matters. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. I've been thinking about regrets today. Things I'd do differently if I could. The firelight played across his features, softening the lines time had etched around his eyes and mouth. In this light, she could see echoes of the young man she'd known that long ago summer. Any specific regrets? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Professional ones. Personal ones. He turned to face her. I regret not trying harder to find you after that summer. The simple honesty of it caught her off guard. I could have tried harder too, she admitted. But we were so young, with such different paths ahead of us. Were they really that different, though? His question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. We both built careers in creative fields. Both threw ourselves into our work. Both chose work over other things, she added quietly. Yes. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. Though I was fortunate enough to have Catherine and Bridget. They gave my life balance, even when I wasn't wise enough to recognize how much I needed it. She must have been remarkable, Margot said. She was. No hesitation in his voice, no artifice. She understood me in ways I didn't understand myself sometimes. Knew when to push, when to step back. He smiled faintly. She would have liked you. You think so? I know so. She appreciated people who lived authentically, who pursued their passions. My biggest regret, she said after a moment, is letting fear disguise itself as practicality. Convincing myself that choosing career over connection was the sensible path, not the safer one. Safer? Emotionally. She watched the flames dance. Art is predictable, in its way. People aren't. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. And now? Now I wonder if I've forgotten how to take certain kinds of risks, she admitted. The gallery was an investment, but a calculated one. This, she gestured vaguely between them. This feels like stepping off a cliff. Without knowing if there's water below, he finished for her. Exactly. His hand found hers in the space between their chairs, warm and solid. What if there is? Water, I mean. Then I suppose we swim, she said softly. But Quentin, your life is in Chicago. Mine's in Boston. Your daughter has concerns. There are so many complications. There are, he agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. But at our age, isn't that true of any meaningful connection? We come with histories, with attachments, with established lives. Second chances rarely arrive without complications, she mused. No. He squeezed her hand gently. But that doesn't make them any less worth taking. Above them, stars had emerged, pinpricks of light in the velvet darkness. Margot tilted her head back to study them, aware of Quentin's steady presence beside her, of his hand still holding hers. I'm not sure what happens after this week, she said honestly. How any of this could work beyond Palmar Island. Neither am I, he admitted. But I know I want to find out. Chapter 6. You can't possibly be serious. Quentin stared at Margot as she balanced precariously on a fallen log that stretched across the narrow creek. Perfectly serious, she called back, arms extended like a tightrope walker. Best view of the marsh birds is from the other side. Come on, architect. Afraid of a little structural instability? He laughed, surprising himself with how easily it came. When was the last time he'd felt this light? This unburdened? Bridget and Owen had taken Finn to the water park on the mainland for the day, giving him an unexpected freedom he'd initially been unsure how to fill. Until Margot had appeared at breakfast with a thermos of coffee, 2 sandwiches from the inn's kitchen and a hand-drawn map of hiking trails that led to parts of the island he'd never explored. The log looked structurally sound, he conceded, stepping carefully onto the weathered surface. But I'm not 25 anymore. My balance isn't what it used to be. Mine either. She grinned, holding out her hand as he approached the middle. That's why we have each other. Their fingers interlocked, warm and steady, as he navigated the final steps to join her on the far bank. Neither let go immediately once he'd reached solid ground. Told you it was worth it. Margot nodded toward the view that had opened before them. A vast salt marsh stretched toward the horizon, its tall grasses rippling like waves in the gentle breeze. Herons stood motionless in the shallows, while smaller birds darted between patches of reeds. I'll admit it, he said, unslinging his day pack. Your island navigation skills haven't diminished. Neither has your trust in questionable shortcuts. Her smile held memories of other adventures, other paths taken together long ago. They found a small clearing to spread their light picnic, sitting close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Quentin felt a curious sense of timelessness, as if the decades between their summers had somehow compressed. Something on your mind? Margot asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. Thinking about time, he admitted. How strange it is that we can step right back into a rhythm after all these years. Not exactly the same rhythm, she pointed out. We're different people now. True. He took a sip of water from his canteen. But the essential notes haven't changed. The way we fit together, somehow. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. The core remains, even if the details have shifted. Exactly. The simplicity of her understanding warmed him. They shared a frequency, a wavelength established decades ago that somehow still resonated. After lunch, they continued their exploration, following a winding path through a maritime forest where live oaks dripped with Spanish moss. The filtered sunlight cast dappled patterns on the ground, and Margot stopped occasionally to photograph particularly striking compositions. I forgot how beautiful this island is, she said as they emerged onto a small bluff overlooking the ocean. How it manages to feel both wild and intimate at the same time. Like it has secrets it's willing to share, but only with those who take the time to listen, Quentin added, surprising himself with the poetic turn of thought. Margot's smile was appreciative. Exactly. No wonder we both ended up in careers that focus on space and composition. This place taught us about both. She was right. Those formative summer weeks a long time ago had indeed shaped his architectural sensibilities, his appreciation for the balance between natural and constructed environments. Had her eye for photography likewise been honed here, on this island with its juxtaposition of wilderness and human presence? What's next on our adventure? He asked as they descended from the bluff toward the beach. That depends. She glanced at her watch. How daring are you feeling? With you? Moderately reckless, he admitted with a smile. What did you have in mind? There's a rental place down by the harbor. They have kayaks. Her eyes held a challenge. Remember that little island with the abandoned lighthouse? I wondered if it was still standing. He did remember, a tiny, uninhabited speck of land visible from the western shore. They'd paddled out to it once, spent an afternoon exploring the crumbling lighthouse keeper's cottage and climbing the iron stairs to the top of the lighthouse itself. It's still there, he said. Restored now, actually. I saw it on our harbor tour. Restored? She looked surprised. Functional? Yes. Though I believe it's only open to the public on certain days. He hesitated, then added, it's actually where Elise and Jacob from the Inn got engaged, according to Miss Doris. Something flickered in Margot's eyes, contemplation, perhaps, or simply curiosity. Well then, we should definitely check it out. For architectural and photographic purposes, of course. Of course, he agreed, enjoying the lightness between them. Purely professional interest. They made their way to the harbor, where the kayak rental process was quick and efficient. Soon they were paddling across the calm afternoon waters, their vessels moving in an easy, synchronized rhythm. Quentin found himself appreciating the physical activity. The way it engaged muscles too often neglected during long hours at his drafting table or in meetings. More than that, he appreciated the woman beside him, her paddle slicing through the water with confident strokes, her face relaxed in a way it hadn't been when they'd first encountered each other at the inn. The guarded quality in her expression had softened over the days, revealing more of the Margot he remembered, curious, adventurous, willing to take the scenic route. The lighthouse came into view, its white tower gleaming against the blue sky. They beached their kayaks on the small strip of sand and secured them above the tide line. It's strange, Margot said as they walked the shell-lined path toward the lighthouse. To see something preserved that we knew in decay. Like the inn. And like meeting again after all these years, he suggested. Her laugh was warm, genuine. Are you calling us decayed, Quentin Rhodes? Weathered, he corrected with a smile. Distinguished by time rather than diminished by it. Much better. She brushed her hand against his, then took it fully, their fingers intertwining with a naturalness that still surprised him. They circled the lighthouse, admiring the restoration work. The door was locked, as expected, no public tours today, but they found a comfortable spot on a weathered bench that offered a view back toward Palmar Island. Thank you for today, Quentin said after a comfortable silence. For suggesting this. Thank you for coming along. Margot leaned slightly against his shoulder. For still being up for adventure. With the right company, adventure is irresistible. He turned to look at her, struck again by how the years had added character to her beauty rather than diminishing it. The gray-blue eyes that had captivated him all those summers ago now held depths of experience, of wisdom earned through living. Her expression softened under his gaze. What? Just appreciating the view, he said softly. Her smile was knowing. The lighthouse is behind you, architect. I'm aware. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, she met him halfway, her lips finding his with a certainty that sent warmth spreading through him. Unlike their first kiss on the moonlit path, this one held no hesitation, no questioning. It was a choice, made in the clear light of day, with full awareness of all the complications and uncertainties ahead. Yet in this moment, with the sun warm on their shoulders and the steady rhythm of waves against the shore, those complications seemed distant, manageable. When they finally pulled apart, Margot's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the sensation. Then she looked at him with such openness, such genuine presence, that Quentin felt something shift within him, a settling into possibility that had been building since he first saw her in the garden. The island creamery glowed like a beacon in the twilight, its cheerful yellow facade and hand-painted ice cream cones drawing a steady stream of visitors. Quentin held the door for his family as they entered the shop, the sweet scent of waffle cones and sugar enveloping them. I want chocolate chip cookie dough, Finn announced, pressing his face against the glass display. In a waffle cone. With sprinkles. Big Day deserves a big treat, Owen agreed, ruffling his son's hair. The water park was a hit. I'm still wrinkled from all that water, Bridget said with a smile, though Quentin noticed the tiredness around her eyes. But worth it to see this one conquer the mega slide. As they waited in line, Quentin found himself glancing through the shop's front windows, his mind returning to Margot. He'd left her only hours ago after their day exploring the island, yet he already found himself hoping for another glimpse. Dad? Bridget's voice pulled him back. What are you having? Oh. He refocused on the extensive flavor board. Probably butter pecan. Or maybe. Miss Margot. Finn's excited voice cut through the ambient chatter of the shop. Quentin turned to see Margot and Daphne entering the ice cream shop, Daphne in animated conversation until Finn's greeting made them both look up. Well, hello there, Sea Explorer, Margot smiled at Finn. Fancy meeting you here. We went to a water park today, Finn informed her, bouncing on his toes. And I got a shark tooth necklace. Look. He proudly displayed the pendant hanging around his neck. Very impressive, Margot said, examining it with appropriate seriousness. A genuine fossil. Are you getting ice cream too? Finn asked. You should try the birthday cake flavor. It has actual cake pieces in it. Quentin watched the interaction with a warmth spreading through his chest, aware of Bridget's eyes on him more than on Finn and Margot. A solid recommendation, Daphne said, glancing at the flavor board. But I'm more of a coffee ice cream devotee myself. Come with us, Finn insisted. We're going to sit at one of the outside tables because Dad says it's too nice to be indoors. Bridget's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Finn, I'm sure Miss Margot and her friend have their own evening plans. Actually, Daphne said with a mischievous glint in her eye, we were just debating how to spend it. Ice cream with charming company sounds perfect. The line moved forward, and they placed their orders, Finn's elaborate creation, Owen's Rocky Road in a cup, Bridget's strawberry sorbet, and Quentin's butter pecan. By the time they collected their treats, Margot and Daphne had ordered as well, and they all moved toward the outdoor seating area. "So," Owen asked as they settled around a table, "how was your day, Quentin? You mentioned exploring the island?" There was a brief moment when Quentin could have been vague, could have glossed over the specifics. But Margot was right there, and something about her presence made dishonesty impossible. "It was wonderful," he said, meeting Margot's eyes briefly. "We hiked some of the nature trails and kayaked out to the lighthouse island." "We?" Bridget asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Margot and I spent the day exploring together," Quentin explained. "The inn staff recommended some beautiful spots." "So you two decided to explore the island together," Bridget said, looking between them. Her tone was conversational, but her eyes were intent. "It seemed like a good opportunity," Margot replied evenly. "Neither of us had been back since that summer. 1987, right?" Bridget added, reminding them she was well aware of their history. "Dad mentioned it was quite some time ago." "A lifetime ago," Quentin agreed, meeting his daughter's gaze. "Reconnecting after all these years," Daphne interjected with a smile that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. "Isn't that something?" Bridget took a deliberate bite of her sorbet. Fascinating how paths cross again after so many years. The tension at the table was palpable, at least to the adults. Finn remained blissfully focused on creating the perfect ratio of sprinkles to ice cream in each bite, occasionally offering updates on his progress. "The lighthouse is really cool," he announced between mouthfuls. "Did you go all the way to the top, Grandpa? Can you see forever from up there?" "We couldn't go inside," Quentin explained, grateful for the diversion. "It's only open to the public on weekends. But the view from the island itself is spectacular." "Can we go?" Finn asked eagerly. "Tomorrow?" "It's quite a paddle," Margot said gently. "It's further than it looks. But the staff at the kayak rental mentioned there's a great view of it from Pelican Point." "We could go there instead," Finn decided. "All of us. Like a family adventure." The innocent suggestion hung in the air. Quentin saw something flash in Bridget's eyes, concern, perhaps, or a deeper discomfort with the idea of Margot being included in family activities. "We'll see, buddy," Owen said, rescuing the moment. "We've got the sea turtle walk tomorrow morning, remember?" "Oh yeah." Finn's attention pivoted instantly. "Miss Margot, you're still coming with us, right? For the turtles?" Margot glanced at Bridget, clearly sensing the undercurrents. "If that still works for everyone." "Of course," Owen replied when his wife remained silent. "The more eyes looking for turtle nests, the better our chances." Conversation shifted to safer topics as they finished their ice cream, but Quentin remained acutely aware of the tension between Bridget and Margot. As they gathered their napkins and empty cups, Bridget touched his arm lightly. "Dad, can you walk with me back to the inn? I wanted to ask you about some things for Mom's birthday next month." The pretext was transparent, but Quentin nodded. "Of course." They said their goodbyes, with Finn extracting another promise from Margot about the turtle walk before Owen led him toward the car. Daphne made a show of wanting to check out a nearby boutique that was still open, practically dragging Margot along with her. Once they were alone, walking along the quiet street back toward the inn, Bridget was silent for several moments. "Is this serious?" she finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I don't know," Quentin answered honestly. "It's new. Unexpected." "Is it? You specifically chose this island, this inn, Dad. Was it really such a surprise to run into her?" The gentle accusation caught him off guard. "I chose Palmar Island because of the sea turtles, for Finn. The Pelican Inn because it had good reviews and connected rooms available. And the fact that you spent a summer here with her decades ago had nothing to do with it?" He hesitated. "I didn't expect to see her again, Bridge. But yes, I suppose part of me remembered this place because of that summer." She studied his face in the glow of the streetlights. "Mom's only been gone 3 years." The simple statement held volumes. Quentin felt a familiar ache at the mention of Catherine. I know that. I'm not, this isn't about replacing your mother. Nothing could. Then what is it about? Her question wasn't angry, just concerned. A vacation fling? Reliving your youth? Because we leave in 3 days, Dad. And then what? It was the question he'd been avoiding himself. I don't know yet, he admitted. They walked in silence for a moment, the sound of distant waves the only accompaniment to their footsteps. I just don't want to see you hurt, Bridget said finally. Or confused. Grief does strange things to people, makes them reach for connections, for the familiar. This isn't grief talking, he assured her, though he understood her concern. If anything, it's the opposite. It's about feeling alive again, about possibilities I thought were close to me. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded slowly. Just, be careful, okay? With your heart. And with Finn's too. He gets attached so quickly. I know. He put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her close as they walked. I'll be careful. Chapter 7. Margot hadn't intended to eavesdrop. She'd come to the inn's library in search of a quiet place to edit the photos she'd taken over the past few days. With Daphne having gone into Charleston for the day, the small writing desk in the library seemed the perfect retreat. Until voices from the adjacent sunroom carried through the partially open French doors. I'm just saying it seems awfully sudden. Bridget's voice, soft but intent. They barely reconnected and he's spending every waking moment with her. Margot froze, her finger hovering above her laptop's trackpad. She should announce her presence or quietly leave. Instead, she remained perfectly still. He seems happy, Owen's reasonable tone filtered through. Happier than I've seen him in a long time, actually. Of course he seems happy. He's reliving some storybook summer romance. But what happens when reality sets in? When we go home in a few days? When he has to confront what this actually is versus what he's imagining it to be? Margot's chest tightened. These were questions she'd been asking herself as well, in the quiet moments between their increasingly frequent time together. You don't think he's thought about that? Owen asked. I think he's deliberately not thinking about it. A chair creaked as if Bridget had shifted her weight. He doesn't want to face the fact that this is nostalgia. Comfort. A way to connect with who he was before Mom got sick. Bridget. I know how it sounds, she continued. But I watched him for 3 years after we lost her. He was devastated. Empty. And now suddenly he's found this woman from his past, and it's like he's grabbing onto her as a lifeline to some happier time. Margot felt a flush creep up her neck. Was that all she was? A temporary escape, a nostalgic detour? Have you considered, Owen suggested gently, that this connection might be genuine? That maybe they're getting along so well because there was something real there to begin with? After 37 years? With completely different lives? Bridget sighed. Look, I'm not saying she's a bad person. She's been wonderful with Finn. But it's the timing that concerns me. Dad's still vulnerable. It's been 3 years, honey. 3 years isn't that long when you've been married for 35. Bridget's voice softened. I don't want him getting hurt. Margot's hand trembled slightly as she closed her laptop. Every doubt she'd pushed aside over the past week was now being articulated in Bridget's concerned voice. Your dad's a grown man, Owen reminded her. He's always been thoughtful about his choices. But he's never been in this position before. Widowed, retired, suddenly reconnecting with his first love on a nostalgic island getaway? It's like the setup for a Hallmark movie. First love. The phrase echoed in Margot's mind. Is that how Quentin had described her to his family? The thought both warmed and terrified her. All I'm saying, Bridget continued, is that it's too soon. Too fast. They've spent, 5 days together? And they're already acting like they've figured something out. Like they're making plans. Have they said they're making plans? Owen sounded surprised. Not explicitly. but I see how they look at each other." There was a pause. "It's exactly how he used to look at Mom." The simple observation hit Margot like a physical blow. She hadn't allowed herself to consider the depth of what was happening between them, how quickly casual reminiscence had transformed into something that felt alarmingly like falling in love. Again. Or perhaps still. "You can't protect him from everything, Bridge," Owen said gently. "If this is important to him, then I want him to approach it with clear eyes. Not vacation brain. Not grief-fogged judgment." A chair scraped against the floor. "He deserves someone wonderful. I want that for him. But I also want him to be sure. To be ready." Margot gathered her things as quietly as possible, desperate to escape before she was discovered. "Margot?" She looked up to find Miss Doris, the elderly woman who seemed to know everything about everyone at the inn, watching her with knowing eyes. "Are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Margot managed, straightening her shoulders. "Thinking about heading home soon." "Ah." Miss Doris nodded sagely. "Endings are always bittersweet. But I've found that what seems like an ending often turns out to be something else entirely." She patted Margot's arm. "Especially in matters of the heart." "I'm not sure what you mean," Margot said, though something in the older woman's expression suggested she knew exactly what was troubling her. "Just that Palmar Island has a way of bringing people where they need to be." Miss Doris smiled. "Sometimes for a visit, sometimes for longer. The trick is recognizing which one you're meant for." Before Margot could respond, Miss Doris continued down the hall, leaving her alone with thoughts that now seemed even more jumbled than before. Bridget was right to be concerned. This was too fast, too soon. Whatever she and Quentin were feeling, it needed to be examined in the harsh light of reality, not the golden glow of a beach vacation. For both their sakes. Margot's phone chimed with a text message. "Quentin, suggesting a sunset walk along the beach." She stared at the screen, her finger hovering over the reply box. 3 hours had passed since she'd overheard Bridget's concerns, and she'd been wrestling with how to respond ever since. "Sorry, catching up on some things." "Rain check?" She finally typed, hitting send before she could change her mind. His reply came almost immediately, "Of course." "Everything okay?" "Just tired. Sorting through photos from the trip." She set the phone down and turned back to her laptop, though she'd made little progress in organizing the hundreds of images she'd captured. Nearly a third featured Quentin. His profile against the setting sun, his hands gesturing as he explained something to Finn, his quiet smile as they explored the island together. Ridiculous, she told herself firmly. You're acting like a lovesick teenager, not a grown woman with decades of life experience. Her phone chimed again. "Miss you. Dinner later?" The simple message made her heart flip traitorously in her chest. Promised Daphne we'd have dinner together tonight. She's feeling neglected. Tomorrow? Another lie. Daphne was still in Charleston. But Margot needed space to think, to reassert the practical part of herself that had somehow gone dormant the moment she'd recognized Quentin across the inn's garden. When a knock came at her door an hour later, she knew instinctively who it was. "Hi," she said, opening the door to find Quentin standing there, concern evident in his eyes. "I thought you were spending the afternoon with Finn?" "He's having pool time with his parents," Quentin said, studying her face. "Margot, is everything all right?" She stepped back, letting him into the room but maintaining a careful distance. "Just realized I've been neglecting some things. The trip's almost over, and I barely organized any of my photos." "Looks like you're making progress," he said, glancing at her laptop. "Trying to." She folded her arms across her chest, a physical barrier where an emotional one was needed. "Did you need something?" The question came out more abruptly than she'd intended, and she saw a flicker of hurt cross his face. "Just checking on you," he said. "You seemed off in your messages." "I'm fine," she assured him, forcing a smile. "Just getting back to reality a bit." This has been a lovely break, but I have a life waiting back in Boston. Things to figure out. Right. He nodded slowly. We all do. An awkward silence fell between them. I should let you get back to your photos, Quentin said finally. Probably for the best. He took a step toward the door, then paused. Margot, if I did something. You didn't, she cut him off quickly. Everything's fine, Quentin. I just think we've been getting a bit carried away with all this. The nostalgia, the reminiscing. It's been wonderful, but. His voice was carefully even. But we should probably take a step back, she said. Be realistic about what this is. Something shuddered in his expression. And what exactly do you think this is? A lovely reconnection, she said, the words tasting false. A chance encounter that's brought back some nice memories. But we're different people now, with separate lives waiting for us. In 2 days, you'll go back to Chicago, I'll return to Boston, and that's it? The question was soft but pointed. A pleasant interlude, nothing more? Margot swallowed against the tightness in her throat. Isn't that the sensible way to look at it? We barely know each other anymore, Quentin. A week of conversations doesn't change that. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. If that's what you want, he said finally. Though I thought, well, it doesn't matter what I thought. It's not about what I want, she said quietly. It's about being practical. About not setting ourselves up for disappointment. Right. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Practical. That's always been my approach too. I'll still see you tomorrow, she offered. For Finn's farewell beach party. I promised him I'd come. He'll be glad. Quentin moved toward the door. For what it's worth, I don't think we were getting carried away. I think we were finally allowing ourselves to feel something genuine. Something that deserves more than being dismissed as vacation nostalgia. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Chapter 8. 3 days. That's how long it had been since Quentin had felt the shift in Margot. Since their conversation in her room, when something had changed. A warmth cooling, a door slowly closing. He'd seen her since then, but each interaction had felt increasingly distant, carefully choreographed to maintain a friendly politeness while avoiding anything deeper. Quentin stood on the inn's porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. They still had several days left on the island, but the countdown had begun. Each passing hour felt like an opportunity slipping away, a chance to understand what had gone wrong, to find a way forward that didn't involve simply walking away from whatever had blossomed between them. He'd tried giving her space, thinking perhaps she needed time to process the intensity of their reconnection. He'd tried casual conversation, keeping things light when they did interact. Nothing seemed to bridge the growing distance between them. Dad? Bridget's voice came from behind him. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, he admitted as she joined him at the railing. His daughter studied him for a moment, her eyes shadowed with concern. You've been saying that a lot lately. Just making the most of our time here. He gestured toward the horizon. Can't see sunrises like this in Chicago. She leaned against the railing beside him. Nothing to do with a certain photographer who's been avoiding you? Quentin sighed. He should have known Bridget would notice. She'd always been perceptive, especially when it came to his moods. That obvious, huh? Only to someone who's known you her entire life. She bumped his shoulder gently with her own. Want to talk about it? He considered deflecting, changing the subject to their travel plans or Finn's latest beach adventure. But the weight of unspoken thoughts had been pressing on him for days. I'm not sure what happened, he said finally. Everything was good, better than good, and then suddenly it wasn't. She pulled away. When exactly? After that night at the ice cream shop. The next day she started making excuses, canceling plans. When I went to check on her, she dismissed what we'd been sharing as vacation nostalgia. The memory still stung. As if it was just some pleasant reminiscence, nothing more. Bridget was quiet for a moment, watching the waves break against the shore. Maybe she got scared. Of what? The same thing I've been worried about, she said carefully. That this is happening too fast, without enough consideration for what comes after the vacation ends. Quentin turned to look at his daughter, realization dawning. Did you say something to her? No, Bridget said quickly, meeting his gaze. I wouldn't do that. But I did have a conversation with Owen about my concerns. In the sunroom at the inn. It's possible she might have overheard. The pieces clicked into place. Margot's sudden withdrawal, her insistence on being practical, her retreat behind a wall of friendly detachment. It made a painful kind of sense. What exactly did you say? He asked, his voice measured. Bridget sighed. That I was worried about the timing. That it seemed too soon after Mom, that maybe you were confusing comfort and nostalgia with something deeper. I see. He turned back to the ocean, working to keep his expression neutral. Dad, I wasn't trying to sabotage anything. I was talking to my husband about legitimate concerns. She touched his arm. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it before you answer. He nodded, waiting. Is this real? Bridget asked softly. Is what you feel for her a genuine connection, or is it partly the comfort of having someone who knew you before? Who reminds you of a simpler time? Maybe even a way to feel something other than grief? The question struck closer to home than he wanted to admit. He'd been so caught up in the joy of rediscovering Margot, in the easy way they'd fallen back into rhythm together, that he hadn't fully examined his own motivations. I don't know, he admitted after a long pause. It feels real. But you're right that the timing is complicated. You still miss Mom, Bridget said. It wasn't a question. Every day, he confirmed. That doesn't change, no matter who else comes into my life. And Margot lives in Boston. You live in Chicago. You've spent a week together after nearly 4 decades apart. That's not much of a foundation to build on. Each point landed like a small stone, building a wall of doubt that was becoming harder to see past. Quentin ran a hand through his hair, frustration and uncertainty warring within him. So what are you saying? That I should just let her go? That we shouldn't even try to figure out what this could be? I'm saying be sure before you make promises neither of you can keep. Bridget's voice softened. I want you to be happy, Dad. More than anything. I just don't want to see you hurt, or see you hurt someone else, because you're rushing into something without fully understanding what's driving you. The sun had fully cleared the horizon now, its golden light spilling across the water. In its clarity, Quentin found himself examining feelings he'd been too afraid to question. Was there an element of escape in his attraction to Margot? A reaching for something from his past because it felt safer, more certain, than forging something entirely new? I don't know what happens next, he said finally. But I do know that what I feel for Margot isn't just loneliness or nostalgia. It's not a replacement for what I had with your mother. He met Bridget's eyes. It's its own thing, complex and unexpected and worth exploring. Then why haven't you fought harder for it? The question caught him off guard. He'd been giving Margot space, respecting what he thought were her wishes. But had he been too passive? Too willing to accept the distance she'd imposed without challenging it? Or had he, on some level, been relieved? Had part of him welcomed the reprieve, the chance to avoid confronting exactly the questions Bridget was now forcing him to consider? I don't know, he admitted, and the uncertainty in his voice surprised him. Bridget squeezed his arm gently. Then maybe that's your answer, Dad. Maybe your hesitation is telling you something important. The doubt that had been hovering at the edges of his mind took root, a creeping uncertainty about what he truly wanted. About whether he was ready for whatever might come next if he pursued this connection with Margot. I just want you to be sure, Bridget said. Whether that means talking to her or letting her go, be certain it's what you really want, not what seems easiest or most comfortable in the moment. She left him then, heading back inside to help Owen with Finn's breakfast, leaving Quentin alone with thoughts that suddenly seemed far more complicated than they had just days ago. He pulled out his phone, looking at the last text he'd sent Margot yesterday. A simple invitation to join them for their planned beach day. She'd responded with a polite excuse about needing to organize her photographs. He'd accepted it without pushing, without trying to break through the careful distance she'd established. Why? Was it respect for her boundaries? Or fear of what might happen if he did manage to breach them? The realization was uncomfortable. He'd spent his career making decisive choices, taking calculated risks when the potential reward justified it. Yet here, where the stakes felt infinitely higher, he'd hesitated. Held back. Perhaps, as Bridget suggested, that hesitation was telling him something. Or perhaps it was simply another form of self-protection, a way to avoid the vulnerability that came with fully committing to the possibility Margot represented. Either way, they were running out of time. Unless something changed, unless one of them bridged the growing rift between them, whatever had been building would remain unfinished, unexplored. The question was whether he was certain enough, of his feelings, of his readiness, of what he truly wanted, to be the one to take that step. And as the morning light illuminated the world around him, Quentin realized he didn't know the answer. Chapter 9. Margot folded another blouse with methodical precision, smoothing the fabric before placing it in her suitcase. Around her, the room she'd occupied for nearly 2 weeks showed signs of her imminent departure: toiletries gathered in a travel case, photography equipment nestled in padded bags, books stacked beside her purse. The Pelican Inn had confirmed they could accommodate her early checkout. She'd even managed to change her flight, grateful for the flexibility of her open-ended return ticket. By this time tomorrow, she would be back in her Boston apartment, surrounded by the familiar contours of the life she'd built. Away from Palmar Island. Away from complications. Away from Quentin. Just a vacation thing, she murmured to herself, the phrase becoming a mantra. A temporary reconnection, pleasant but ultimately impractical. Something to remember fondly, not pursue beyond the boundaries of this island interlude. She reached for her camera on the nightstand, running her fingers along its familiar contours. The last images she'd taken were still stored on its memory card, shots of the dunes at sunrise, sea oats silhouetted against the early light. No people, just landscape. Yet even these simple images carried memories she'd struggled to compartmentalize. Quentin beside her in the pre-dawn darkness, waiting for the perfect light. His hand brushing hers as they walked along the shoreline. The way he'd understood, without explanation, why she needed to capture that particular moment. Her phone chimed with a text from the airline, confirming her seat assignment for tomorrow's flight. The sound prompted her to check the time. It was nearly noon. If she maintained her current pace, she'd be packed and ready to leave after breakfast tomorrow, avoiding the awkwardness of lengthy goodbyes. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. "Margot Winslow, I know you're in there," Daphne's voice came through the door. "Open up or I'll cause a scene that will bring the entire inn running." Margot sighed, recognizing the determination in her friend's tone. She opened the door to find Daphne standing with arms crossed, silver blonde hair twisted up in a colorful scarf, her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "So it's true," Daphne said, pushing past Margot into the room. "The front desk just told me you're checking out tomorrow. 3 days early." "I got some unexpected work," Margot lied, closing the door. "A gallery in New York is considering showing my photographs. I need to prepare the portfolio." "That's nonsense." Daphne planted herself on the edge of the bed, displacing a stack of neatly folded cardigans. "You're running away." "I'm being realistic," Margot countered, rescuing her clothes. "This vacation has been wonderful, but real life is waiting." "My real life?" "In Boston." "Right. The real life you were so eager to escape when we planned this trip. The one that had you feeling aimless and untethered after selling the gallery." Daphne's expression softened. "The life where you've spent decades keeping everyone at arm's length, including yourself." Margot turned away, busying herself with rearranging items in her suitcase. "I'm not having this conversation." Well, I am, whether you participate or not. Daphne gestured at the half-packed luggage. You found something rare here, Margot. Something many people spend their entire lives looking for. And you're walking away from it because you're scared. I'm being practical, Margot insisted. We live in different cities. His family can be worked with. And last I checked, planes fly between Chicago and Boston every day. Daphne leaned forward. The real question is, what are you so afraid of? The directness of the question caught Margot off guard. She sat heavily on the armchair beside the window, her practiced defenses momentarily faltering. Disappointment, she admitted softly. His or mine? Investing in something that might fall apart once we're back in our real lives. Disrupting everything I've built for, what? A reconnection based on nostalgia and vacation romance? Is that really all you think this is? Daphne's voice was gentle now. Because I've known you for over 20 years, and I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him. Margot stared out at the ocean, its vastness suddenly overwhelming. His daughter thinks it's too soon. After his wife. Ah, Daphne's eyebrows rose in surprise. And how do you know what Bridget thinks? I overheard a private conversation between her and Owen. Margot's fingers traced patterns on the armrest. She's concerned that he's confusing grief with genuine connection. That we're both caught up in vacation emotions without considering realities. And do you think she's right? I think she's his daughter, who loves him and wants to protect him. Margot sighed. And I think she might have a point. Daphne was quiet for a moment, studying her friend. You know what I think? I think you're using her concerns as an excuse. The perfect justification for doing what you always do. Run before things get too real. That's not fair, Margot protested. Isn't it? Your entire adult life has been an exercise in keeping safe distances. From potential partners, from genuine vulnerability. Daphne softened her voice. Even your photography, capturing moments from afar, preserving them in a frame where they can't touch you directly. The observation struck uncomfortably close to home. Margot had always considered her independence a strength, her self-sufficiency a virtue. But viewed through Daphne's lens, it looked more like a carefully constructed defense. What if she's right, though? Margot asked, voicing the fear that had been circling her mind. What if this is just a vacation thing? Something that feels significant in this setting but won't translate to real life. That's always the risk, isn't it? With anything worth having. Daphne stood, moving to the window beside Margot. But what if she's wrong? What if this is something rare and genuine, and you walk away without even giving it a chance? Which would you regret more? Margot had no immediate answer. The past week had awakened something she'd long since buried. A capacity for joy, for connection, for seeing possibilities rather than limitations. And yet, the thought of pursuing those possibilities beyond the safety of this island terrified her in ways she struggled to articulate. I care about him too much to be a complication in his life, she said finally. His family has been through enough. That's very noble, Daphne said dryly. And completely misguided. Shouldn't he get a say in what complications are worth having in his life? I've made my decision. Margot stood abruptly, returning to her packing with renewed determination. The flight's booked. The inn's been notified. It's better this way. Better for whom? Daphne challenged. Because from where I'm standing, all I see is you choosing safety over happiness. Again. Margot continued folding clothes, her movements mechanical. I'm choosing reality over fantasy. There's a difference. Is there? Daphne moved toward the door, then paused. You know, for someone who spent her career celebrating beauty and truth through art, you're remarkably willing to turn your back on it when it appears in your own life. The observation landed like a physical blow. Margot's hand stilled on the sweater she was folding. I just think it's sad, Daphne continued. That after all these years, you're still letting fear make your decisions for you. She opened the door. Dinner's at 7 if you decide you want to join the land of the living for your last night. Though I imagine you'll find an excuse to hide up here instead. After Daphne left, Margot sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by the evidence of her imminent departure. Everything was proceeding according to plan. By this time tomorrow, she'd be on a plane, leaving behind Palmar Island and the complicated emotions it had stirred. She told herself it was the sensible choice. The kind choice. But if that were true, why did it feel like she was tearing something essential from her chest? Her gaze fell on her camera, sitting on the desk beside her laptop. She hadn't taken a single photograph in the 3 days since she'd begun pulling away from Quentin. The longest she'd gone without capturing an image in years. Maybe this was just a vacation thing, she said aloud, testing the words again. But in the quiet room, with no one to convince but herself, they sounded hollow, unconvincing. What was she so afraid of? Daphne's question echoed in her mind. The answer was both simple and terribly complex. She was scared of the possibility of loss. Of the risk of learning that what felt profound was merely temporary. But beneath those fears lay a deeper one, rarely acknowledged. The fear that it was real. That what she felt for Quentin was genuine and lasting. Because if it was, then she'd spent decades settling for less connection, less vulnerability, less love, than she might have had. Better to leave now, she told herself, returning to her packing with renewed determination. Before goodbye became any harder. Before the fantasy of what might be overshadowed the reality of what was. Tomorrow she would leave Palmar Island, return to Boston, to the structured, independent life she'd built. And eventually, the ache in her chest when she thought of Quentin would fade. It had before, after all. 37 years ago, when they'd parted the first time. The fact that she'd never quite forgotten him, never quite recaptured the connection they'd shared, was something she refused to examine too closely. Just as she refused to acknowledge the voice in the back of her mind, sounding suspiciously like Daphne's, asking if she was making the biggest mistake of her life. Again. Chapter 10. Quentin sat at the breakfast table in the inn's dining room, absent-mindedly stirring his coffee while Finn explained his latest seashell classification system. Bridget and Owen were still upstairs getting ready for their planned excursion to the lighthouse point. His mind kept circling back to Margot. To the growing distance between them. To his inability to bridge it. "Grandpa, you're not listening," Finn accused, poking Quentin's arm with a small finger. "Sorry, buddy," Quentin smiled apologetically. "Tell me again about the spiral shells." "I said the spirals are Group A and the fan shells are Group B." Finn's exasperation was tempered by patience that seemed beyond his 6 years. "And Miss Margot said when you group things by shape it's called morphology," Quentin supplied, his attention sharpening at the mention of her name. "Yeah, that. She knows lots of science words. She was helping me yesterday when you were on the phone." Finn carefully rearranged the shells laid out before him. "How come she's not coming to the lighthouse with us today?" "I don't think she was invited, Bud," Quentin said gently. "Well, I'm inviting her now," Finn declared with the uncomplicated certainty of childhood. "She said the lighthouse has the best view for taking pictures." "I'm afraid Miss Margot is leaving today," said a voice behind them. "Checking out early." Quentin turned to find Miss Doris approaching their table, coffee pot in hand. The inn's resident busybody had a gift for appearing precisely when interesting information needed sharing. "Leaving?" Quentin repeated, something cold settling in his chest. "Today?" Miss Doris nodded, topping off his coffee. "Heard it from Kayla at the front desk. She changed her flight, too. Something about work back in Boston." "But we still have 3 more days," Finn protested. "She promised to help me find a perfect sand dollar before we left." "Sometimes grown-ups have to change their plans, dear," Miss Doris patted Finn's shoulder. "Though in my experience," she added with a meaningful look at Quentin, "the things worth having are worth changing your plans for." She moved on to the next table, leaving Quentin frozen in place, the implications of Margot's early departure washing over him in waves. She wasn't just maintaining emotional distance. She was physically removing herself from the possibility of reconciliation. Running away before they could even attempt a conversation about what came next. "Is Miss Margot mad at us?" Finn asked, his small face creased with concern. "No, buddy. Not at all." Quentin found himself reaching for words that would make sense to a child when nothing made sense to him. Sometimes adults get scared. Of what? The simple question hung in the air. What exactly was Margot afraid of? What was he afraid of? The questions he'd been avoiding since Bridget confronted him on the porch demanded answers. Of feeling too much, he said finally. Of caring about someone and not knowing what happens next. Finn considered this with surprising seriousness. "When I'm scared, Mom says to be brave anyway. She says courage isn't not being scared. It's doing the right thing even though you are scared." Out of the mouths of babes. Quentin looked at his grandson. "Your mom is very smart. So are you going to be brave, Grandpa?" The question landed like a stone in still water, ripple spreading outward. Was he going to be brave? Or was he going to let Margot walk away, again, without even trying to find a way forward together? "Excuse me for a minute, Finn." Quentin stood abruptly. "Go back to the room and come back down with your mom and dad, okay? I need to check something." He strode toward the front desk, where Kayla was sorting through mail. "Good morning, Mr. Rhodes. Can I help you with something?" "Margot Winslow," he said without preamble. "I heard she's checking out today." Kayla hesitated, clearly wondering about the boundaries of guest privacy. "That's correct. She's scheduled for an 11 a.m. checkout." Quentin glanced at his watch. Just past 9:30. "Is she in her room now?" "I believe so." "Would you like me to call up for you?" "No, thank you." He was already moving toward the stairs. "I'll take care of it." Each step up the elegant staircase felt like a decision. A commitment to action after days of uncertainty. His hesitation had cost them valuable time. Time they could have spent finding solutions instead of focusing on obstacles. Time they could have spent together instead of carefully avoiding meaningful interaction. Bridget's question still echoed in his mind. Was this real? Was he confusing comfort and nostalgia with genuine connection? But with the immediate threat of Margot's departure, those questions seemed less relevant than the certainty gripping him now. He couldn't let her leave without telling her how he felt. Without at least trying to see if what they'd found was worth pursuing beyond Palmar Island. He paused outside her door, room 14, suddenly uncertain what he would say. How did you compress decades of feelings into a doorway conversation? How did you convince someone to take a chance on something neither of you had planned for? Before he could second-guess himself further, he knocked firmly. The door opened to reveal Margot, dressed in neat trousers and a soft blue sweater that made her eyes appear more gray than blue. Behind her, he could see a packed suitcase on the bed and her camera equipment carefully arranged in padded bags. "Quentin." She seemed genuinely startled. "What are you?" "You're leaving," he said simply. Not a question. She hesitated, then sighed. "Yes. Some work came up in Boston. I need to." "Don't." He shook his head. "Please don't pretend this is about work." A flicker of resignation crossed her face. She stepped back, wordlessly inviting him in rather than continuing their conversation in the hallway. He entered, closing the door behind him. The room was tidy, impersonal except for the few belongings she hadn't yet packed. It struck him how quickly all evidence of her presence could be erased, as if she'd never been here at all. "Why are you running, Margot?" The directness of his question seemed to catch her off guard. She turned away, adjusting an already perfectly placed toiletry bag in her suitcase. "I'm not running. I'm being practical. We both knew this vacation would end. But not yet. Not for 3 more days." He moved closer, careful to maintain enough distance that she wouldn't feel cornered. "And not without talking about what happens next." "What happens next is we go back to our lives," she said, her voice steady though she still wouldn't meet his gaze. You to Chicago, me to Boston. We remember this as a lovely reconnection, and that's that. Is that really what you want? He interrupted. To reduce what we've shared to a pleasant memory? Now she did look at him, her eyes shadowed with something that looked like resolve mixed with regret. What I want isn't the point. Time to get back to reality. The reality is I've spent the last 3 days trying to understand why you pulled away, he said. Wondering if I'd misinterpreted everything, if what I felt was one-sided. Questioning whether I was ready for what this might become. She was silent, watching him with a wariness that suggested she was braced for whatever would come next. And I realized something this morning, he continued. When Finn asked why you were leaving. He took a deep breath. I realized I've been making the same mistake I made 37 years ago. Letting fear disguise itself as practicality. Letting distance seem easier than the risk of disappointment. It's not that simple, Quentin. No, it's not. It's complicated and messy and uncertain. We live in different cities. We have established lives. My daughter has concerns. He took a step closer. But none of that changes the fact that meeting you again feels like finding something I didn't even know I was missing. That being with you makes me happier than I've been in years. That the thought of you walking away without us even trying to figure this out feels like a mistake I'll regret for the rest of my life. She swallowed, her composed facade showing the first cracks. Quentin. I heard what Bridget said to Owen, he admitted. About me possibly confusing grief with genuine connection. And I've thought about it constantly. Questioned my own feelings, my readiness. He held her gaze. But the only confusion was thinking I needed to be completely healed before I could open myself to something new. That loving Catherine somehow meant I couldn't also care deeply for you. I don't want to be a complication in your life, she said softly. You're not a complication. He closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. You're a possibility. One I never expected to find again. She looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. I overheard your daughter talking to Owen. She's worried about you. About us moving too fast, about this being nothing more than vacation emotions. She's protective, he acknowledged. And she has a right to be. But she doesn't get to decide what I feel. What I want. He squeezed her hands gently. And what I want is a chance to see if what we've found here can grow into something lasting. Something real. And if it can't? The vulnerability in her question made his heart ache. Then at least we'll know we tried. That we were brave enough to find out. He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. The truth is, Margot, I never really stopped wanting you. Even after all these years. Even when I believed I'd never see you again. Her eyes widened slightly at the admission. I loved my wife deeply, he continued. Our life together was everything I could have asked for. But there was always this echo. This memory of something unfinished. Of you. A tear slipped down her cheek, which she quickly brushed away. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. How to take this kind of risk at our age. How to imagine restructuring my whole life around a connection that exists outside of real-world pressures. Neither do I, he admitted. But I know I want to try. With you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the blue sea glass they'd found together on the beach days earlier. The piece Finn had been so excited about because of its rarity. Remember what you said when we found this? About how it started as something broken, discarded, but time and circumstance transformed it into something beautiful? She nodded, her eyes fixed on the smooth blue glass in his palm. I think that's us, Margot. We've been shaped by time and distance and the lives we've built separately. But that doesn't mean we can't create something new and unexpected together. Something beautiful in its own way. For a long moment, she was silent, and Quentin felt the weight of everything balanced on her response. He'd laid his heart bare, crossed the distance she'd put between them. Now it was her choice whether to step forward or step back. Don't go, he said softly. Not yet. Stay the last few days. Give us time to talk about what comes next, to find a way forward that acknowledges the complications but doesn't surrender to them. She looked from the sea glass to his face, her expression a mixture of hope and lingering doubt. You make it sound so simple. It won't be, he acknowledged. But I think it might be worth it. He held out the piece of sea glass. What do you think? As she reached for the small blue treasure in his palm, their fingers brushed, and Quentin felt the same electric connection that had surprised him on that first day in the garden. A connection that felt both familiar and entirely new. A promise of possibilities neither of them had anticipated when they arrived on Palmar Island, but which now stretched before them like the endless horizon beyond the shore. All she had to do was take that first step forward instead of back. And as he stood in the sunlit room, holding his breath, Quentin waited to see which direction she would choose. Chapter 11. Margot stared at the piece of sea glass in Quentin's palm, its smooth blue surface catching the morning light. Such a small thing, transformed by time and the relentless motion of waves. Once sharp edges now rounded, once discarded glass now something precious. How many times in her life had she chosen safety over possibility? How many connections had she let slip away because vulnerability felt too dangerous? The pattern was so familiar she'd stopped questioning it, wrapping her choices in the comfortable language of practicality and independence. I've spent my entire adult life running, she said softly, more to herself than to Quentin. From complications. From uncertainty. From anything that couldn't be neatly controlled. His eyes held hers, steady and patient. Waiting. It worked, in its way, she continued. I built a good life. A successful career. But there were always these spaces. Empty corners I pretended not to notice. She reached out and took the sea glass from his palm, its smooth surface cool against her fingers. The same fingers that had spent decades capturing moments but rarely fully living them. I'm tired of running, she admitted, the words both frightening and freeing. Tired of choosing safety over joy. Of watching life through a viewfinder instead of experiencing it directly. What are you saying? Quentin's voice was careful, as if he was afraid to assume too much. Margot looked around the room at her packed bags, at the life she'd been so ready to retreat to just minutes ago. Then back at the man standing before her. This unexpected gift the universe had placed in her path twice now. The road not taken, offering her another chance. I'm saying yes, she said, her voice stronger now. Yes to staying these last few days. Yes to figuring out what comes next, however complicated it might be. The smile that transformed his face made her heart catch. He reached for her, and she stepped into his embrace without hesitation, tucking the sea glass into her pocket as his arms enfolded her. I can't promise I won't be scared, she murmured against his shoulder. That I won't have moments of doubt. I'm not asking for certainty, he said, his voice warm against her hair. Just willingness to try. To see where this leads. Margot leaned back to look at him, at the face that had somehow become so dear to her in such a short time. I can promise that. His lips met hers with tender certainty, a gentle pressure that made her heart flutter against her ribs. Margot's eyes drifted closed as she leaned into him, one hand resting against his chest where she could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. The faint scent of his aftershave mingled with the salt air drifting through the open window, creating a sensory memory she knew she'd carry forever. As his arms tightened around her, the kiss deepened, transforming from tentative to certain. Unlike their previous encounters, shadowed by questions and hesitations, this kiss held the weight of choice. It was deliberate and sure. Her fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt as warmth spread through her, a physical manifestation of the connection between them. This wasn't just desire or nostalgia, but something richer, more complex. Something with roots that had somehow survived decades of separation, only to bloom more fully now. When they finally drew apart, just enough to breathe, their foreheads touching, Margot felt a sense of homecoming so profound it nearly overwhelmed her. As if some essential part of herself, long missing, had finally been restored. I should probably call the airline. And the front desk. Probably, he agreed, though he made no move to release her. Or I could do it while you unpack. While I unpack, she repeated, liking the sound of it. The commitment to staying, to facing whatever came next together rather than separately. The next few hours passed in a blur of practical arrangements and unexpected joy. Quentin handled the calls to the airline and front desk while Margot unpacked her carefully folded clothes. The efficient rhythm of her fingers returning garments to drawers felt different somehow. It was purposeful rather than merely methodical. Each item restored to its place a small act of faith, of choosing presence over retreat. Finn's delight when they told him Margot was staying was infectious, his excited plans for their remaining days spilling out in a torrent of 6-year-old enthusiasm. Even Bridget, after a moment of surprise, offered a cautious smile. "He seems happy," she said quietly to Margot when they found themselves briefly alone. "Happier than I've seen him in a long time." "I care about him a great deal," Margot replied, meeting the younger woman's gaze directly. "I know you have concerns. They're valid ones." Bridget studied her for a moment. "Just be patient with each other. Whatever this becomes." She glanced toward where Quentin and Finn were examining a map of the island. "He deserves someone who sees him clearly. Who chooses him with open eyes." "I'm trying to be that person," Margot said honestly. Something in her response seemed to satisfy Bridget, who nodded once before rejoining her family. Not approval, exactly, but acknowledgement. An opening where before there had been only wariness. For now, it was enough. The remaining days on Palmar Island took on a dreamlike quality, filled with moments that seemed both ordinary and precious. Margot found herself storing memories not just through her camera lens, but more importantly, in her heart. There was the lighthouse expedition, where Finn's enthusiasm had them climbing the spiral stairs twice so he could count the exact number of steps. The picnic on the Hidden Cove beach, where Owen surprised everyone with his expert sandcastle building skills. The evening when Daphne somehow convinced the entire Rhodes family, including an initially reluctant Bridget, to join her sunset yoga session on the dunes. But the moments Margot treasured most were the quiet ones with Quentin. Walking hand in hand along the shoreline as dawn painted the sky in watercolor hues. Sitting together on the inn's porch after everyone else had gone to bed, talking about everything and nothing. Books they'd loved, places they'd visited, dreams they still harbored. On their final evening, they gathered around a beach bonfire, the flames casting golden light on familiar faces that just 2 weeks ago had been strangers. Finn, fighting sleep as he toasted one last marshmallow. Owen and Bridget, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. Daphne holding court with an increasingly outrageous story about her adventures in Charleston that had even Miss Doris raising her eyebrows. "Penny for your thoughts," Quentin said softly, his arm warm around Margot's shoulders. She leaned into him, watching the flames dance. "I'm thinking about how differently this vacation could have ended. If you hadn't knocked on my door that morning. If you hadn't been brave enough to stay," he added. "If we hadn't both decided some risks are worth taking." She pulled the piece of sea glass from her pocket, where she'd carried it since the day she decided to stay. Its blue surface glowed in the firelight. "I've been thinking about what comes next." His arm tightened slightly around her. "So have I." "It won't be simple," she acknowledged. "Different cities, established lives. Bridget's still getting used to the idea of us." "Nothing worth having ever is," he said, echoing Miss Doris's words from days earlier. "But I think we're both done choosing the easy path over the meaningful one." Margot nodded, turning the sea glass over in her palm. "I've been talking to some gallery contacts in Chicago. About showing my work there." She glanced up to find him watching her with surprised pleasure. "It wouldn't be a permanent move right away. But it would mean regular visits. A way to see if we can build something beyond this island." "You'd do that?" "For the right reasons. For the right person." She smiled. "For myself, too. The artist I want to become, not just the one I've been." His kiss was gentle, flavored with promise and possibility. Around them, the conversation continued, the fire crackled, the ocean whispered against the shore. Life, in all its messy, beautiful complexity. Later, as they walked back to the inn along the moonlit path, Quentin's hand warm in hers, Margot felt an unfamiliar sense of peace settle over her. Not the absence of fear. There were still countless unknowns ahead, practical challenges to navigate, a relationship to build beyond the enchanted bubble of vacation. No, this was something different. A certainty that whatever came next, she'd chosen the braver path. The path that led toward connection rather than away from it. Toward the possibility of a love reclaimed, a future she'd never imagined possible. In the morning, they would leave Palmar Island, returning to their separate lives. For now. But something essential had changed. The carefully constructed walls she'd built over decades had been breached, allowing light to pour into places long kept dark. There would be logistical hurdles, difficult conversations, moments of doubt. Long-distance calls and visits, negotiations about whose life would bend to accommodate the others. The careful integration of their separate worlds into something shared. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Margot wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. In taking this leap of faith, in choosing connection over safety, she'd rediscovered parts of herself she'd forgotten existed. The capacity for joy. For hope. For believing in possibilities rather than limitations. As they reached the steps of the Pelican Inn, its white clapboard siding glowing silver in the moonlight, she paused to look back at the ocean one last time. The endless horizon, once intimidating in its vastness, now seemed like an invitation. A reminder that some journeys were worth taking, however unknown their destination. Quentin waited patiently beside her, his presence an anchor in this new, uncharted territory. When she turned back to him, his smile held the same quiet wonder she felt, the recognition that they'd been given a rare gift. A second chance at a path not taken. A love interrupted but never truly forgotten. Hand in hand, they climbed the steps toward the warm light of the inn, leaving footprints in the sand behind them. They were the beginning of a new story, one written not in the language of what might have been, but in the promises of what still could be. Together. Epilogue. Palmar Island, 1 year later. The island hadn't changed in a year, but Quentin saw it through different eyes now. The familiar curve of the shoreline, the swaying sea oats on the dunes, the charming storefronts along Main Street. They all held new meaning, infused with memories of the summer that had changed everything. "I think that's it up ahead," he said, slowing the rental car as they approached the shell-lined drive to the Pelican Inn. Beside him, Margot lowered her camera, having just captured the sun-dappled canopy of oak trees that formed a natural archway over the road. "Still as beautiful as I remember," she said, her voice warm with anticipation. "Though I'm not sure anything could live up to how I built it up in my mind this past year." Quentin reached across the console to take her hand, the simple gesture still bringing a rush of gratitude even after months together. "I don't know. Some things get better with time and distance." He glanced at her, taking in the relaxed set of her shoulders, the contentment in her eyes. "I'd say we're proof of that." The past year had been one of transitions and adjustments, of building something new while honoring what came before. Margot's photography exhibit in Chicago had been the first bridge between their separate lives. It started as a 3-week stay that had stretched into a month, then regular visits back and forth between their cities. Phone calls and video chats filled the gaps between, creating a rhythm that somehow worked despite the challenges of distance. 6 months ago, she'd accepted a position as artist-in-residence at a Chicago University's fine arts program, a role that allowed her the flexibility to continue her own work while mentoring emerging photographers. The timing had been perfect, with Quentin transitioning his architectural practice to focus on select projects that truly interested him rather than maintaining the demanding schedule he'd kept for decades. "Look," Margot pointed as they rounded the final curve. "They've added more gardens." The Pelican Inn came into view, white clapboard gleaming in the June sunlight. The formal gardens that had been newly restored during their last visit now extended further across the grounds, with a stone pathway winding through carefully tended flower beds. The wraparound porch was decorated with hanging baskets of ferns, their feathery fronds swaying gently in the ocean breeze. Quentin parked beneath the shade of a massive oak and cut the engine. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, taking in the sight of the place where their story had been rewritten. "Hard to believe it's been a year," he said finally. In some ways, Margot agreed. In others, it feels like so much longer. Her fingers intertwined with his. Like we've been building this life together for much more than 12 months. He understood exactly what she meant. Their connection had deepened with a speed that might have seemed reckless if not for the solid foundation beneath it. Their summer together decades ago and the intense 2 weeks they'd spent here last year, rediscovering each other. "Shall we?" he asked, nodding toward the inn. The familiar creak of the porch steps welcomed them as they carried their luggage up to the entrance. The foyer was cool and bright, with fresh flowers arranged on the antique secretary desk that served as the check-in counter. "Well, look who's back." Miss Doris appeared from the sitting room, her silver hair elegantly coiffed, her smile wide and knowing. "I told Elise you two would return." "Didn't I say so, Elise?" Elise appeared behind her, shaking her head with amusement. "You absolutely did, Miss Doris. At least once a week for the past year." She extended her hand to Quentin, then Margot. "Welcome back to the Pelican Inn. We've been looking forward to your visit." "Thank you for accommodating our extended stay," Quentin said. "4 weeks is a long time to occupy a room during the busy season." "The East Suite was available, fortunately," Elise replied, handing them an old-fashioned key with a wooden tag. "It has its own small kitchenette and sitting area, which we thought might be more comfortable for a longer visit." As they followed Elise up the stairs, Quentin noticed the subtle improvements to the inn. There was new artwork on the walls, fresh paint in the hallways, and updated light fixtures that maintained the historical aesthetic while providing better illumination. The care that went into preserving this place while allowing it to evolve resonated with him. The East Suite exceeded his expectations. Spacious and filled with light from tall windows, it offered a separate sitting area, a small but well-appointed kitchenette, and doors opening onto a private section of the wraparound porch with an unobstructed view of the ocean. "This is perfect," Margot said, already moving toward the windows to study the quality of light. Her photographer's eye was never fully at rest. "I'll leave you to get settled," Elise said. "There's a welcome basket with some local treats and information about new restaurants and activities on the island." After she left, Quentin wrapped his arms around Margot from behind, both of them gazing out at the view. "Happy anniversary," he murmured against her hair. She turned in his embrace. "Best year of my life," she said simply. They unpacked with the easy coordination of a couple accustomed to sharing space, moving around each other in a comfortable dance. Margot arranged her photography equipment on the desk while Quentin hung their clothes in the closet. It had taken time to learn these rhythms. How she preferred her equipment organized. His habit of grouping clothes by type rather than color. But like everything else between them, adjustment had come naturally, each compromise feeling less like sacrifice and more like evolution. Later, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they sat on their private section of porch, wine glasses in hand, watching the day fade into evening. "I have something for you," Quentin said, reaching for his messenger bag beside the chair. "An anniversary gift, of sorts. Though it's more of a proposal." Margot's eyebrow rose. "Should I be concerned?" "Not necessarily," he smiled, pulling out a large envelope. "Though I am asking you to consider a significant life change." Her expression grew curious as he handed her the envelope. "Now I am concerned." "Open it," he encouraged. "Then decide." Margot set aside her wine glass and carefully opened the envelope, sliding out several large sheets of paper. As she unfolded them, her eyes widened. "These are architectural plans," she said, studying the detailed drawings. "For a house," he confirmed. "On the north shore of Lake Michigan, about an hour from downtown Chicago. I found the property 3 months ago and have been working on the design since." She looked up at him, then back at the blueprints, taking in the open floor plan, the walls of windows facing the water, the studio space with northern light. "This is beautiful, Quentin. But I don't understand. Are you thinking of building this for yourself?" "For us," he said simply. "If you want it." Her fingers traced the lines of the drawing. "This looks like a permanent home, not just a vacation property." "That's the idea." He moved his chair closer to hers. The past year has shown me that what we have isn't just a rekindled summer romance or a comfortable companionship. It's something I want to build a life around. A future. She was silent, studying the plans with an intensity that made him nervous despite their months together. The design incorporates elements from both our aesthetics, he continued, pointing to features on the blueprint. The clean lines you prefer with the traditional details I gravitate toward. A modern kitchen because you love to cook. A studio with perfect light for your photography. My office overlooking the water. A home for both of us, she said softly. Yes. He took a deep breath. I'm not asking you to give up your apartment in Boston or your connections there. That's part of who you are, and I love who you are. But I am asking if you're ready for us to create a place that's truly ours. Not my home that you visit, or your space that I stay in, but something new that we build together. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You've thought about this a lot. Ever since you agreed to the position at the university, he admitted. It felt like the right time to propose something more permanent. And here I thought my big news was going to be that they've offered to extend my residency for another year. She smiled through her tears. This rather overshadows that. Is that a yes? He asked, heart hammering with anticipation. It's a show me more of these plans and tell me everything you've envisioned for this house, she replied, setting the blueprints on the small table between them. And it's a I love you for understanding that building something new doesn't mean erasing what came before. Relief and joy washed through him. I wouldn't want to erase any of it, he said earnestly. Your life in Boston, my years in Chicago with Catherine and Bridget, even our separate paths after that first summer, all of it shaped us into the people who found each other again. Who recognized something worth holding on to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. From it, he extracted the piece of blue sea glass they'd found together last summer. He had it wire-wrapped in silver and hanging from a delicate chain. I had it made into a pendant, he explained as she touched it with wondering fingers. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things come from unexpected journeys. From being shaped by time and circumstance into something new. As she admired the pendant, Quentin reached into his pocket once more and withdrew a small velvet box. Her eyes widened as she registered what was happening. I know we found each other again by chance, he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. But I don't want to leave anything else to chance. Not anymore. He opened the box to reveal a ring with a sapphire the color of the sea glass, set in platinum with small diamonds flanking it. Margot Winslow, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building this house, this life, this future together? Tears spilled onto her cheeks as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. Yes, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. Yes to all of it. His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It caught the last light of the setting sun, sending blue reflections dancing across their faces. Perfect fit, she whispered, looking from the ring to his face with a joy that made his heart swell. Just like us, he replied, pulling her into his arms. It just took us a while to realize it. Margot's smile was radiant as she lifted her hair, turning so he could fasten the necklace around her neck. When she faced him again, the sea glass rested just below her collarbone, the ring gleaming on her finger. Two symbols of a journey that had come full circle. As twilight deepened around them, they returned to the blueprints, heads bent together over plans that represented far more than a physical structure. With each question, each suggestion, each shared vision, they were architecting not just a house, but a future. One that honored everything they'd been while celebrating everything they could become. Later, after dinner at a new restaurant in town and a moonlit walk along the familiar shore, they stood together on their private section of porch, the sound of waves a gentle backdrop to the moment. Hard to believe we might never have had this, Margot said, her head resting against his shoulder, the sea glass pendant cool against her skin. If you hadn't knocked on my door that morning. If I hadn't found the courage to stay. I think we would have found our way back to each other eventually, Quentin replied, his arms secure around her waist. Some connections are too strong to remain broken. Around them, the Pelican Inn stood silent and strong, a witness to their story's unlikely second chapter. Within its walls a year ago, they had rediscovered something left unfinished decades before. Now they had returned not just to commemorate that reunion, but to celebrate the future they were building together, a future neither had anticipated but both now embraced with open hearts. As stars emerged above the ocean, Quentin drew Margot closer, grateful beyond words for second chances. For summer connections that endured winter separations. For a love that proved some things weren't meant to remain in the past, but to evolve, transform, and flourish in the present. Like the sea glass that now rested against Margot's heart, once broken, discarded, but ultimately transformed into something precious. Something worth keeping. Something beautiful in ways no one could have predicted when its journey began. A testament to the unexpected grace of second chances and the quiet courage it takes to recognize them when they appear. The end. This has been A Second Chance at Pelican Inn. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2025 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2025 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.